His coffin is now at rest at St Giles Cathedral, where members of the public are filing past to pay their respects. Thousands of people are queuing to go inside the cathedral in Edinburgh to view Her Majesty's coffin. Her Majesty will lie in rest there for the next 24 hours. King Charles will stand vigil next to his mother's coffin this evening. The King has visited the Scottish Parliament, where he and other members of the royal family received a motion of condolence from MSPs. After 2 minutes' silence, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon spoke about her first meeting with the Queen when she was a child. She reflected on the Queen's life and her close bond with Scotland. Earlier, the King and other royal family members led a procession following his mother's coffin to St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. It was taken from Holyrood House along the Royal Mile to St Giles Cathedral, where a remembrance service was held. During the service, Elder of the Church of Scotland, Morag Milne, thanked God for the Queen's long life.
With all our hearts, we thank you for the long life, the shining example, the steadfast commitment to duty, the strong faith, and the good humour of our wise and great Queen.
Earlier this morning in London, the King attended Westminster Hall, where both Houses of Parliament expressed their condolences.
Your Majesty, I welcome you and Her Majesty the Queen Consort to Parliament today on this solemn occasion.
In reply, the King said he was deeply grateful for their addresses and described Parliament as a living and breathing instrument of democracy. Paying tribute to the late Queen, he vowed to follow in her footsteps.
While very young, Her late Majesty pledged herself to serve her country and her people, and to maintain the precious principles of constitutional government which lie at the heart of our nation. This vow she kept with unsurpassed devotion. She set an example of selfless duty, which, with God's help and your counsels, I am resolved faithfully to follow.
King Charles III. This is GB News. Back now to Nigel.
Well, there is one full week of mourning to go. I have to tell you, the crowds in London are huge around Buckingham Palace, and people already beginning to queue to get into Westminster Hall to pay their respects to the Queen. Unbelievable. 48 hours before it even begins, there are people camping out on pavements in London. Goodness only knows how the Metropolitan Police and others are going to control the vast, vast numbers that intend to come. But of course, it's been Scotland's Day today, as it was yesterday, very much. And in St Giles Cathedral, the Queen's coffin is there now. Members of the Scottish public are beginning to file past and pay their respects. And at 7:20 or thereabouts, all four of the Queen's children will stand vigil, and they will stand silent around the coffin for a period of about 20 minutes, and we'll cut to that as and when it happens. But what a dramatic day it's been for King Charles. It's very odd, isn't it? On the one hand, it's a very sombre period of mourning. Millions of people still very, very upset. And it's a strange thing. The Queen was 96, and yet I think many of us just thought she was immortal. Well, it wasn't to be. Yet at the same time, Charles has to get out there. And there he was this morning. He was in Westminster Hall addressing both Houses of Parliament. And this afternoon, he's been in Edinburgh processing down the street. I'm joined by GB News' political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who is at Holyrood right now. Darren, just talk us through, please, for our viewers and listeners, King Charles's activities today.
Yeah, quite an extraordinary day, quite a momentous historic day, undoubtedly, Nigel. It began this morning in London, in which the King addressed both houses of Parliament, the House of Commons and the House of Lords, after we heard speeches from the Lord Speaker and the House of Commons Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle. You know, we don't see that very often, do we? And it normally doesn't actually happen in public or even this soon after the death of a previous monarch. But clearly, the King, I keep referring to Prince Charles, King Charles felt it was necessary, kind of part of the constitutional arrangement. He is a constitutional monarch after all, and is there, it must be said, of course, with the consent, only with the consent of Parliament. He then travelled up to Scotland, and the images today, in many ways, have been incredible, frankly. I'm here on the Royal Mile. You were talking there, weren't you, about what the Metropolitan Police are expecting in London. I was reading in the Times this morning where there are concerns that London could become full. Well, at times today, Nigel, Edinburgh has felt like it has been full. The roads have been blocked. This Royal Mile has seen 5, 10, 15 people deep to see that kind of solemn, but also quite joyous moment in some ways of the hearse making its way up this Royal Mile, this medieval street with its cobbled pavements. And there was just silence for large parts of it. Thousands, tens of thousands of people gathered here, and you could hear a pin drop. Yes, at certain points there were rounds of applause. People have got different ways of expressing their emotion, but largely it was a solemn silence. And yet this was a celebration in St Giles Cathedral earlier on of Queen Elizabeth's life, and we heard from the First Minister of Scotland. Gordon Brown was here, Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister, was here. It's incredible how our politicians have come together at this period. And subsequently, since then, we've heard from, again, His Majesty the King in the Scottish Parliament, listening to and taking the motion of condolence from MSPs. And as you say, in the next couple of minutes, we're expecting him to arrive here at St Giles Cathedral, in which he, along with his 2 brothers and a sister, will stay in vigil next to his mother's coffin inside that church for around 20 minutes. This is actually a relatively recent tradition that began back when George V died and his 4 sons stood vigil. We're expecting this to happen, as I say, in the next 20 minutes or so, and it will be the first time we think that a woman has done it. Princess Anne is likely to join her 3 brothers. It will be another emotional moment, I suspect, not just for the royal family, but for those thousands of people that are queuing up to pay their respects here in Edinburgh before the Queen's body moves on to London late afternoon tomorrow.
Thank you very much indeed, Darren. And again, you see Darren expressing there from Edinburgh much the same thing that I've seen in London over the last few days. Huge crowds of people, and yet almost total silence. It really is quite remarkable. Now, as Darren said, the King did address the Scottish Parliament, and joining me is Jamie Green, Conservative MSP, who's an MSP for the West Scotland region. Jamie, good evening. And can I ask you, how did King Charles go down in the Scottish Parliament?
Well, I mean, as one would have expected, he was very gratefully received and very warmly welcomed to the Scottish Parliament. It's not the first time he's appeared in the Scottish Parliament, but it's certainly the first time he appeared as His Majesty the King. And it was quite a special experience. I think your correspondent summed it up perfectly. One of solemn duty, but also of joy and celebration. And I think that really sums up everything you've seen about what's been happening in Edinburgh over the last few days. It's really a celebration of Her Majesty's life, but also doing it in a way that I think only us Scots know how to, and that's with dutiful respect. And I think you can see that from what I can hear. People are lining the streets of Edinburgh trying to view Her Majesty's lying in rest.
Yeah, I mean, thus far, of course, it's been very much a Scottish experience, hasn't it? Right from midday, or about a quarter past midday on Thursday, when we heard the news about the Queen's health, through to everything that you've been witnessing today. And I just wonder, where are the Scottish National Party on the monarchy? I mean, it seems to me that perhaps they do intend to keep King Charles, or have I got that wrong?
I very much hope so. I mean, what we've heard are lots of very, very warm words from the First Minister, who's not just the First Minister of Scotland, but also a leader of the Scottish National Party. She pledged allegiance to the King today. There were slightly less warmer words from members of the Green Party, but I don't think that's a huge surprise to anyone. What I really felt in the chamber, and I'm still in the Scottish Parliament now, was sitting there was a huge amount of warmth in the room, Nigel. What I felt was a Parliament that had unified, that had crossed political divides and really come together to pay tribute to the life of Her Majesty and to pledge allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III. And it still feels a bit odd saying that, I have to say. We had a very brief reception with the King shortly after in the Scottish Parliament, and I know that all parties, there were members from all political parties there ready to pay condolence and wish him very well in the days and weeks ahead. So I really think events like this bring us together. We are, we do have many arguments and divides in the Parliament, but we are also united, entirely united in mourning the loss of our dear Queen.
Jamie Green, thank you very much indeed for joining me. And how this plays out in Scotland politically is going to be very, very interesting indeed. Some commentators think it's going to weaken the union. I'm not so sure. I think these events may well strengthen it. Now, a lot's been made of Prince Charles over the years. What kind of person he is. Will he, as king, not meddle in politics? And already he's rather promised us that he won't. But if you're watchers of The Crown, you would believe that he was absolutely useless at sport, that his father was appalled by this and packed him off to Gordonston, where, looking at The Crown, he had a thoroughly miserable time. And does this perhaps explain why sometimes Prince Charles has been seen by some to be a little bit needy? Well, joining me to discuss this is a man, Norfolk farmer, former member of the European Parliament, but most importantly for this conversation, Stuart Agnew was with Prince Charles in the same class for 5 years at the so-called dreaded Gordonston. Yeah. Stuart, welcome.
Well, first of all, I just want to apologise for listeners for not being in black. Coming from Norfolk, we're celebrating the Queen's reign. We're not all dressed in black like everybody else is here. It's no sign of disrespect at all. It really isn't.
We'd accept that. When you went to Gordonston, what was it really like?
Oh, it was grim. It really was. And I was in a house as a new boy 3 miles from the school. It was that awful winter of 62, 63. We never saw what the countryside looked like until early March. It was frost and snow. We all had to wear shorts, everybody. You weren't allowed to wear anything else. We had to cycle there. Sunday nights we had to cycle to chapel. We hated that. I really loathed that first year.
So in some ways the Crown's quite accurate in showing that it was a tough place to be. But there you were, a very small class, and you were with him all the way through that school experience. How did he cope with it all?
Oh, I really admired him at school. Because so much was expected from him. You see, he was expected to be able to sing in the choir and sing a solo. He was expected to master a musical instrument, perhaps play a solo at that. He was expected to play the lead part in a Shakespeare play, and he did. He was expected to do well academically, and he tried really hard. And he couldn't slack off the way several of us did. He just couldn't. And that business in the Crown, apparently, of him bunking off a cross-country run, rubbish. He never, ever would have done that. And whatever I think about some of his views now, I would want to put it right that at Gordonston he tried hard at everything.
Yeah, and you were saying earlier on that, you know, when you were chatting to him in private once...
yes.
And yet, when the rest of the boys arrived, you
there were only 8 of us doing A-level history. And I walked into the class one day. He was the only person there. He took the opportunity to ask me about pheasant shooting and gamekeeping and all that sort of thing, because he would go to Sandringham in the Christmas holidays, be given a gun, pheasants and partridges would come all over him. He didn't really understand what it was all about, so he asked me as a Norfolk farmer. So I started to talk to him about it, but then somebody else came in, and my immediate reaction was to stop talking and walk away from him. I didn't want to be seen sucking up to Prince Charles, and I tell that story against myself, but everyone was like that. And it must have been awful for him. But in the end, they sent some aristocrats to the school, especially to be friends for him.
So he had a very tough time.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Very
he
tough
tried
time.
hard, though.
And a quick little story, Stuart, you told me that you got into a bit of trouble and you had to sort of own up to him a few years later.
Oh, 25 years later, I was driving down a green lane in a little village called Bircham near Sandringham. Towards me was coming this individual in a pale-coloured raincoat with some little terrier dogs in front of him. He was holding a plastic bin liner and picking up rubbish and putting it in. Oh, strange chap. I was going very slowly, looking at my sheep, the other side of the hedge. I drew level with him. He was trying to avoid eye contact with me. And as I went past, I looked, thought, I know who you are. And I went on for a few more yards, and I thought, no, how often do I see an old Gordonson boy on a green lane? Banged the Land Rover into reverse, went back, shoved my head out of the window, said, it's Stuart Agnew from Gordonson, you remember me? And he said, yes, I do. And he was very careful. He looked in the Land Rover, wondering if there were any press in there, because it was a difficult time for him then, early 90s with Diana and everything. Anyway, I started to joke to him, imitated his housemaster. We chatted about people at the school. And then I said, look, I've got to come clean about something that happened at the school in our last year. And I promised myself, if I ever saw you again, I would come clean and tell you about it. And one day, when I was a senior at the school in my last year, I walked into the changing room there and opened the door of the dungeons, it was called, and a piece of bread smothered in margarine and jam on somebody's hand straight into my face. And it was a new boy called Baker. And what was he? I was so angry, I just shoved this boy. He was very tall for his age, but very light and spindly. He went tottering backwards, couldn't keep his balance, and his head smashed into the wall at the far end, wedged between two big clothes pegs. And I thought, oh, I'm going to clean my face, I'll deal with you later. Well, Prince Charles walked through the door that I'd walked through only seconds later. What did he see but this blubbering boy Baker stuck between the clothes pegs with blood pouring out of his nose? And he said, who did this to you? Agnew, Prince Charles. I thought, my God, I could hear all this. Charles couldn't see me. I was hiding behind the door. I thought I could be in real trouble here, bullying. Just at that minute, my brother Jim, also a new boy, appeared from another changing room off to the left. Charles looked at him and said, what's your name? Agnew, Prince Charles. I am giving you 2 hours penalty drill. If you were an older boy and had done that to him, I would have sent you to the headmaster. Don't you ever do that again. Charles then got Baker off the hooks and led the boy blubbering up to the sanatorium. I heard all this. Jim was still there, wondering what on earth was going on. I said, look, Jim, please do the punishment. I did this to Baker. Look, I will give you 20 quid to do the punishment. We'd all been given 100 quid by our grandmother, us boys. And 20 quid... Then, you imagine a farm worker's weekly wage, £12. It was a big sum of money. Anyway, Charles did enter the punishment in the book. Jim did do the punishment. I paid him the money, and Baker appeared to recover. So I recalled all that to Charles in this lane at Bircham. He said, yes, he said, I do remember that. It was, I always thought there was something fishy about it. It was very, very gruesome. Yes. Well, I dined out on that.
So you owned up all those years later?
Yeah, I owned up. But then there was a sequel. A few years later, I was asked shooting. Late Charles found. He said there's going to be a few Gordonson boys there, Stuart. Well, I turned up. They were a bit younger than me. It seemed I didn't know them. Anyway, I told this story again about Charles and everything in the at little drinks break. And at the end of it, one of the other guns, one of the other chaps there, stood up and said, Stuart, I have to tell you, I am Baker. He shook hands, very sorry. And I said to him, why on earth did you do that? As a third former, did you do that to a sixth former? He said, Stuart, I wasn't expecting you. I was expecting your brother Jim.
There you
That
are.
is all true.
So, Charles, it was a difficult time for him, but... Is he going to make a good king, Stuart?
Well, from what I've seen so far, I think he's going to make an excellent king, actually. It looks as though he understands what has to be done, and he's got the sort of looks for it, he's got the gravitas. He seems to know what is needed and to be compassionate, to go to places where there have been terrible tragedies. And I think he and his wife, the Queen Consort, Camilla, I think they'll do the job very well indeed.
Now, you live very close to Sandringham. What's the response been up there? Because the Queen, of course, a very much loved figure.
Well, I haven't actually been up to the gates. Apparently, people have been up there and left flowers. I live about 10 miles from it. Again, I'm sorry if it seemed to be... sort of flippant, but I'm a great fan of the Queen, and I just thought she played a blinder. She knew 2 months ago there was going to be a new Prime Minister, and she would have to swear him or her in. Yeah. She sort of psyched herself up to do that, and do that properly, and the time came, she did it, and then she just quietly passed away. You couldn't do it better, could you?
It is totally and utterly remarkable.
Yeah.
Stuart, thank you for coming in.
Loved it.
And explaining why Prince Charles, perhaps Gordon's did make him a bit sensitive, and maybe you were part of the problem.
Almost certainly.
Stuart, thank you very much indeed. Let's get back to the Scottish Parliament, get some more reactions to Prince Charles's visit there, and the point I made after I'd spoken a moment ago to Jamie Green about what it all means perhaps for the Union, without getting too political. Well, Sandesh Gulhane is an MSP for the Glasgow region for the Conservatives, and Sandesh joins me down the line now. We spoke a moment ago to Jamie Green. I just, as I say, I don't want to get too political, but would it be fair to say that this has been a very, very Scottish event, all of this since Thursday? Doesn't this in some ways bring people together?
Well, Nigel, the first thing to say is I think that's probably what the Queen wanted. I mean, we've heard everyone talk about how much the Queen loved Scotland and how much the Scots loved the Queen back. So actually, when you see the first monarch in 400 years dying in Scotland, I think this is what the Queen would have wanted to have happened. She would have wanted to be in her beloved Balmoral. And when you see the outpouring of love, I was stood on the Royal Mile as the coffin came past. It was just respectful silence. And then there was people clapping when King Charles III walked past us. And it was all just done in such a beautifully nice, well-natured manner. So actually, this is bringing Scotland together. The Queen brought people together. Politics does divide, but the Queen certainly was bringing people together, and she did that here in Scotland.
Yeah, and the SNP being very, very respectful towards her indeed.
I have to say, listening to Nicola Sturgeon speak just there, she gave a very personal account of what the Queen meant to her. And then you heard speeches from Douglas Ross and Alex Cole-Hamilton and Anna Sarwar, and they were just very lovely, well-made speeches, ending with God Save the King. There was one exception here in the Scottish Parliament. It was a real shame because actually this is an event where we were offering condolences to the King, who actually it's his mother. Let's not forget, no matter where you are in the political divide, this is somebody's mother that has died, and we need to be respectful of that.
Yeah, look, you know, I tell you what, you will always, Sandesh, find one or two people wherever you go in life who are incapable of behaving. But it does sound to me, although Charles's visit to the Scottish Parliament has been something of a success, and thank you very much indeed for joining us here on GB News. Well, we've talked about Scotland. We'll talk a lot more, of course, in the next couple of days about London as these vast queues, or we're at least told these vast queues, I think they will be vast queues that form to go through Westminster Hall, the very same place, of course, where King Charles spoke this morning, a place that's been there for over 900 years. Now, there's a fact that Americans find completely and utterly mind-blowing. Well, joining me to discuss all of this, and I'm going to ask Claudia Joseph, these are most extraordinary week sort of ever, isn't it, for a royal commentator?
I think it must be, yes. I mean, you begin to forget when it started. It's like, which day did the Queen die? Which day was Charles crowned? Or not crowned, but... you know, you just like, right, next, what's next, what's next?
Yeah, I mean, today's been extraordinary for Charles, hasn't it? I mean, to go there, address both Houses of Parliament, then it's hot foot to Edinburgh, to walk through the streets, and boy, they're narrow streets to walk through.
I know, and he's not a young man. You know,
I mean, but that must have been quite an atmosphere walking down that narrow street. At some point, very shortly, he's going to stand vigil, and when he does, we will cut there and get some live shots of that. I mean, these are very busy days for him. And
he's zigzagging up and down from Scotland. I mean, it's just, well, most mortals wouldn't be able to do that, let alone when you're grieving, you know, for your pet, for your mother and your father as well.
It's as if he almost hasn't got time to grieve there, isn't it?
No, I think that's true, although he does look so tearful most of the time. I mean, understandably, it is a very difficult thing for all of them, I think, to have to do in public. You know, losing your mother when you've known her your whole life, 73 years. I mean, most of us lose our parents slightly younger, but if you know them long enough, you
Yeah.
get to know them very, very well, and it hurts in some ways more because you expect them to be immortal.
Now, Camilla's on parade the whole time. The Queen Consort is on parade the whole time. It was noticeable as he walked into Westminster Hall, that long walk from those massive back doors to the steps, and she was sort of half a pace behind him. I guess there's some sort of protocol in that. But she's having to go through these long days, and she can't say anything.
I know.
How's she managing?
I think she's prepared for this, isn't she? She's as dutiful as Charles is, and I think they've decided their future. They've known it's coming. They've been waiting for it. I think she's done a lot of the chit chat when she's been able to in between, and they have a break. It's sort of an hour on show, and then back in the car and back to the castle or whatever. So they do have a bit of time to rest, but it must be a huge strain on both of them.
Yeah, it was suggested to me by an Australian television channel that she was looking a bit nervous, as if she'd rather be at home with a sherry. I said, well, who wouldn't, you know? I mean, it's quite an ordeal to go through, isn't it?
Well, I think certainly when they arrived back at Buckingham Palace on the first day, I think she looked, well, very tearful, very anxious and very unsure exactly what to do.
They were quite brave, they weren't they, to get out of that car and go and meet the crowd before they went through the gates. It was quite a brave thing to do.
Apparently, it's very typically Charles, and it's just something we haven't seen in the past because he doesn't appear to be spontaneous. But in fact, I think he's very much like his mother. He likes meeting and greeting the crowds.
Now, what's our advice to people, Claudia? Because people are sort of weighing up. Do they come into London? They'd like to walk past the catafalque. They'd like to pay their respects to the Queen. But, you know, 1 minute you read in the newspaper there'll be a 10-hour queue.
I read 30 hours a minute.
Oh, it's got a 30 now, is it? Yeah.
I mean, it can't be. It just, can't...
Are the authorities, are they trying to scare people off from coming? Is that what's going on, do you think?
I just don't understand what's going on. They still haven't announced exactly what the route is, where people... it looks like you're going to have to walk 5 miles, queue for 30 hours. I mean, that's physically impossible, isn't it? I mean, what are people going to be all doing, sleeping on the street?
Well, we're just looking at our pictures here of the queues in Edinburgh, the Vigil in Edinburgh. And from all accounts, there have been very big crowds in the streets in Edinburgh today. But yeah,
it looks manageable, doesn't it, there?
Well, we can't see round the corner how long the queue is, so I don't actually know. It looks manageable.
You are right, of course, you can't see the queue, but it looks...
We're going to cut live now to St Giles' Cathedral.
Have they arrived?
OK, so we see people in the line, and we are awaiting the four of Queen Elizabeth's children who will replace the ceremonial guard who have been standing vigil by the catafalque, by the coffin, and any minute now we expect the 4 children to come in. Now, there is some precedent for this. The 4 grandsons, as I understand it, of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, in 2002, they stood vigil in Westminster Hall. And going back to 1936, when King George V died, his 4 sons stood vigil then. So there is some precedent. Although I think what's different, perhaps, about this one is that the Princess Royal, Princess Anne, will take part in this, and this will be the first time that a woman in a royal function has performed that role. We'll keep these pictures going. 1 or 2 of you at home giving me some opinions here. One viewer says, I hope the late Queen's love of Scotland and the Scottish people will do much to strengthen the Union. Well, as I say, I don't want to get too political at this stage, but I do have a feeling that it must, in some ways, have brought Scotland more together than divided it. Jason says, Jason, I do agree with this. I wish mourners would put their phones away, Nigel. Just embrace the moment. And bow your heads in thought. And I must admit, Jason, I thought when Charles and Camilla got out of the car, as I was just discussing a moment ago with Claudia, it was as if it was more important to get it on the phone than it was to live the moment. But I guess it's almost unstoppable, Claudia, isn't it?
Well, it is ridiculous. I looked at it and thought, would I have my phone? And then I thought, well, no, because there'll be so much better pictures online. Experience it. You can get the pictures later.
Yes.
What do you need your own picture for? Unless you're a fantastic photographer with a long lens, you're just not going to get...
Which almost none of us are.
Exactly.
We all think we are.
Well, speak for yourself.
Yeah, well, yeah, but as you say, there are fantastic pictures.
Yeah.
Why people can't just enjoy that moment and live for the moment, I really, honestly don't know. Sue says to me, our wonderful monarch died in Scotland, hence the need for Operation Unicorn, as we have seen it so far. Congratulations to GB News for the coverage, thank you. I haven't seen it pointed out, though, that the death of Queen Elizabeth II in Scotland, it's the first monarch to die there since James V in 1542. Now, that is history. I think, to be fair, Sue, we have been pointing out that it's the first monarch to die for 400 years. We've done our best not to leave any stone unturned. So at the moment, though they're due to be standing vigil in St Giles, they're not there yet. As soon as they're all there, and by the looks of these pictures coming in, it looks like, the Royal Cavalcade is now making its way to St Giles. So I think in a moment we will see them standing vigil. Claudia, so I've got to get back to this lying in state, because I'm worried about this, because huge numbers of people want to come and do this. They're now being warned off doing it. But actually, if people don't get the chance, if we finish up with massive queues in London of people that haven't been able to pay their respects, this could backlash a bit, couldn't it?
Well, I think it could, but I think they've got to work it out, haven't they? They have got... the reality is that I don't know if you've ever queued to walk past a coffin, but people walk... it's just a steady
I did in
procession.
2002, yes, yeah. I did. And I think it was 250,000 people in 2002 did walk past the Queen Mother's coffin, did pay their respects. So, yes, but they're talking, of course, about airport-style security. So you've got to metal check people. It's a very difficult operation, isn't it?
Well, and yes, but it depends on the process. If you're just walking past an airport-style metal detector and you're just walking through and you haven't got to check your bags and things like that,
then it might just about be
potentially.
manageable.
I mean, if you've got to empty your pockets out and go through, then it's madness.
Yeah,
but...
it's going to be very, very difficult. And Claudia, can I ask you, how do you think King Charles III is doing so far?
I think he's doing amazingly well. I think he's said all the right things. He's been working around the clock. I think it's very moving to see him. He's obviously grieving. And
the address, I mean, the King's speech, I have to say, I found it pretty moving. I found it moving because I could see how cut up he was and how close to tears. But he did hold it together, didn't he?
He did. I think it's wonderful, really, that, in the past he's made some comments about his childhood, but it's obvious that he was very close to his mother in her final years, standing in for his father, spending a lot of time with her. He was there, obviously, at the end with her, which must have been a great comfort to him. And I think that, in times to come, will be a comfort. And I think he's going to be a marvellous king. I think he's very thoughtful and very sensitive. He's not so much of the stiff upper lip as his mother was.
No.
So we do know more about him.
Different generation.
Different generation, different interests, although he shared a lot of the same interests, but obviously he's fascinated by art and architecture and the environment and things that are very close to his heart that maybe he won't be able to get so involved in nowadays.
Which will please some of us.
He can't really go around calling buildings carbuncles anymore, maybe.
Well, no, probably not. And, of course, the question that the tabloid press really want the answer to, of course, it's the Harry and Meghan story above all.
Yes.
How did you view what happened on Saturday outside Windsor, outside the gates with the flowers? Is this a short-term rapprochement? This relationship can't really be mended, can it?
It's difficult. I think we have to see what Harry writes in his book. He may well be having regrets at the moment. He obviously looks very cut up and very upset about the death of his mother. I think that William did the right thing. It was a pragmatic move to go and see the flowers together. There may be more rapprochement, but the reality is that unless Meghan and Harry decide that they're going to change course completely and take a role within the royal family, it's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, and it was noticeable in the King's speech. I thought it was noticeable that whilst the King referred to the new Prince and Princess of Wales, he did not talk about the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. He talked about Harry and Meghan.
Yes.
And their new life overseas.
And how much he loved them and cared for them. But
yes.
It wasn't about duty and responsibility and a royal role. It was very much about happiness.
There's no way back, is there?
I fear not, but never say never.
Well, Claudia, on that optimistic note, against my pessimism, I will say thank you very much indeed for coming in and joining us today. And just given the sheer length of time that this whole process takes, actually does allow us to try and talk about people's personalities. And I think, actually, to some extent, that is what we are doing. Because we're really in a very odd situation. Massive public events are going on constantly, and yet it's the personalities that we're fascinated by. And we're fascinated by who is Camilla. We're fascinated by, can Charles control his emotions? And we, of course, are just incredibly reverential about the Queen, and we're moved by what's happening in America. A friend of mine rang me from Nice at the weekend. He said, my goodness, he said, French television, it's wall-to-wall royal coverage. This is the most fantastically huge global event. But we're also loving some of the stories. You couldn't do it for the first 48 hours. But we're now loving some of the stories about the Queen, her impishness, her sense of humour, what she said to various public figures. And let's remember, next Monday, here in the heart of London, it is going to be a very dramatic and a very sombre event. But it is also going to be a commemoration and a celebration of a life well lived, of someone who lived to 96 years and had the most extraordinary achievements. Well, Tom Mollo is a former deputy equerry to the Queen, and a role, of course, that Peter Townsend famously had some years before. Tom, you saw the Queen at close quarters, but I guess when you were with her, guiding her on public events, these must have been quite tense moments.
Remarkably, when I look back on my time as an equerry, not so tense when you were part of what we used to describe as the home team. It was like the home team and the away team. Right. And the team around the Queen, not just the equerries, but the ladies in waiting. Our job was to basically try and make things to go as smoothly as possible, whether people were visiting or dignitaries were coming in or the Queen was on visits. And, I wouldn't say tense, Nigel, I'd just say you knew the stakes were high on some of these. They were very high-profile events. I mean, I was 26 years old. I can't imagine now doing something like that at 26. I was the youngest equerry, captain in the Coldstream Guards. And one was constantly conscious that, we had people like President Jiang Zemin of China coming in on, I don't remember that first state visit of a Chinese head of state. That was quite controversial, potentially, because of the Tibet issues. There was a lot of focus on it. We had, but we went about it, and I think the visit itself was a success and ran smoothly. But it was the one person I would say who was never gave across any kind of tension was the Queen herself.
So clearly she was remarkably calm under pressure.
Yeah, she was calm under pressure. I've been thinking about it a lot this week, and I just think she was the most consistent person that I've ever dealt with. And I think you're hearing that from a lot of people that worked with her and knew her, and just was never overreacted if something went wrong. However, she had such a great sense of humour, and I think...
And you saw that as well.
I think one of the things that used to tickle her was when, nothing major, but when some things didn't go quite as smoothly as they could have done. And I remember one episode, I think quite soon after starting, where we used to take in the dignitaries through the big double doors into one of the rooms at Buckingham Palace, and we'd sort of, chat to the visitor first. And there was, I don't know who he was, I think he was a diplomat. He was quite a large man. And as the double doors opened, I realised, despite the fact it was quite a big door, there wasn't a lot of room for the three of us actually to get through the door. And as I took a step forward, he sort of barged me into the side of the door, and there was a terrible clanging of sword scabbards, and I slipped, and I just looked forward, and the Queen was standing there on her own with her hands together, and she just had a twinkle in the eye. And of course, the first thing that she mentioned afterwards was, that wasn't very good, was it, Tom? but so she always
Did you want the
laughed.
sort of earth to open up, or was it done in such a way that it didn't really have?
Never. No, you always felt that, it was fine, mistakes would happen, and no, she was just brilliant to work for.
I suppose when you're doing hundreds of engagements every year, if everything goes to clockwork, it's quite boring, really, isn't it? So I suppose the odd little thing going wrong here and there.
Yeah.
And as someone that knew her as you did, and the family, were you shocked last Thursday when you heard the news?
Really very sad, obviously, and I think, everybody shares that, but really shocked. And that's quite a surprising reaction to, the death of somebody that's had such a good, long life, 96 years old. But I think a part of us always thought she was going to go on forever.
Yes. I've been making this point for the last couple of days. It's completely irrational and illogical, and we knew for the last 6 months things weren't quite right. Yeah. We kept hearing mobility issues, but I think we all suspected perhaps a little bit more. That photograph of her with Liz Truss, it seemed there was a big change even from the Jubilee to that moment.
Yeah.
And yet I'm the same as you. We were shocked.
Yeah.
We thought she was immortal, didn't we?
Exactly. And I think the fact that we just assumed that she would continue to work to represent us. When I worked with the Queen, she was in her 70s, but her workload was the same, from her early reign. So she was always doing the red box. She was always doing the papers. At times when we were at Balmoral or whatever, I think we were enjoying it more than her. She was the one working the non-stop, and it doesn't surprise me she kept going right to the end, but it makes me incredibly proud of
yes,
her.
There you are, saying goodbye to one Prime Minister, inviting another one in, and within 48 hours you're gone. That is remarkable. So it hasn't just affected those that know her. Here's the funny thing about it, Tom, that I've seen, is the number of people saying they hadn't realised how much this would affect them.
Yeah.
Until it happened.
It's remarkable, isn't it? I knew that it would hit the country like a ton of bricks. I always felt it would. But listening to people who, for some reason now, feel she's more relevant to their lives than maybe, when she was working, they...
I wonder whether the pandemic had something to do with it. The fact she addressed the nation. The fact that even though she did fewer engagements in the last few years, the engagements she did were very big ones, very public ones, addressing the nation, the Jubilee. She's been very high in our consciousness, hasn't she, for the last couple of years?
And I think perhaps, as you say, more so than at other times in her reign.
Yes.
And anyway, all I can say is that, when she stood up to do those things, it was very much the Queen that I'd worked with and seen in action, whether it was just in an audience with one person, making them feel relaxed and doing that work. She really was. She was just a remarkable human being, and to have had the opportunity for 2 years to have worked with her day in, day out was a real
I think that qualifies as an honour, doesn't it?
Real privilege.
Yeah, I think it does.
Yeah.
And thoughts on Charles? You obviously saw Charles quite a lot when you were there.
Well, he's trained for this for a very, very long time. And my thoughts are that, he probably knows he will undoubtedly know the country better than all corners of the country, better than all of us. So, he knows what he's taking on. And,
no, he does.
He really does. Yeah.
Tom Mullo, thank you.
Thank you
for sharing your private thoughts and reflections. I bet Tom's going to love this next piece, because Alice Porter has put together this package of our Queen. Alice? Is she there? Yeah. Alice, hello. What's been happening? And I understand you're going to tell us about the Queen in wartime as well.
Yes, that's right. I've had a fantastic afternoon here. I've just actually gone and had a look at some of the floral tributes which have been laid to the Queen. It's been really extraordinary to finally sort of get out and see some of them. And there's been a lot happening here at Buckingham Palace. I think it's probably a little dark for people to see now, but there's still streams of people who are coming to Buckingham Palace very much ahead of tomorrow, when we will have the flight from Edinburgh, which will come to RAF Northolt, and the coffin of the Queen will then come to Buckingham Palace, where will be met by the King and the Queen Consort, who, as you were just saying, they have the most extraordinary schedule where they've kind of hot-footed it from Edinburgh to Belfast, and then they will be in London. And we've actually just found out in the last 15 minutes or so that the Prince and Princess of Wales will also be there when the coffin comes to Buckingham Palace. But as you were saying there, I've been actually looking at some of the history of Buckingham Palace in relation to the Queen, and found some extraordinary stories of her during World War II, which I think we can watch now.
Alice, we're going to come to that package, but in fact, we're going to cut live to St Giles's Cathedral, because the 4 children of the late Queen have now entered the cathedral. Slightly later than we thought it was going to be, but they're now there, standing at the entrance to that cathedral as they prepare to go and stand by the Queen's coffin and stand vigil for, we're told, about 20 minutes. Prince Charles leading the 4 of them, followed by Anne, followed by Edward, followed by Andrew. And this is a very solemn, silent moment, and we'll wait until they take up their positions. Again, what an extraordinary day this has been. Another extraordinary day this has been. And they're now taking their positions around the coffin, or the catafalque, which of course is the raised structure that it's actually on. And perhaps we as GB News viewers and as GB News listeners, as the King bows his head, perhaps we too will take a few moments of silent reflection. Let's come back. Well, I think it was worth doing that. It was worth us joining the Queen's 4 children in a moment's silence, about a minute's silence for us, but they're going to stand there around the coffin for the next 20 minutes. And it is, I must say, a very, very powerful sight. Now, that coffin will come tomorrow to London, will be placed in the throne room of Buckingham Palace before it is moved along the Mall, through Parliament Square to Westminster Hall. And that is where members of the public will be able to file past. But frankly, all I can say is that in terms of press reports, whether they're just putting out scare stories to stop everybody, I just do not know how this operation is going to be managed. And I spoke yesterday I was outside Buckingham Palace. I spoke to some young police officers, and they weren't quite sure what the next week and what the next few days had in store. But clearly, police and security services absolutely have got to get this right. Well, I'm joined by Stephen Roberts, who's been with us before many times, former Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the Met. Stephen, this is an unimaginably huge scale of operation, isn't it?
Oh, it's enormous, and there are so many different aspects of it. But bear in mind, for decades, there's been a contingency plan for exactly this event, and it's been reviewed on a regular basis, annually, and then more frequently over those years as personalities have changed, even as traffic conditions in London have changed, and as institutional arrangements have changed. So it's a matter of finishing off the plans rather than starting afresh. With no plan at all. But
how can you estimate how many people will come to London? It's just simply impossible to do.
It is simply impossible. It's going to have to be an educated guess. You can look back at how many people came to see the Queen Mother.
Yes.
But ultimately, no, it's going to be guesswork, and the officers in charge are going to have to adjust their arrangements as the day goes on, as the situation develops. I understand they've got something like 1,500 military personnel to help.
Yes.
And they've also got police officers from every force in the country moving down to London.
10,000 police officers involved in this operation.
That figure sounds about right to me, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. Well, we're watching these scenes from St Giles of the Queen's 4 children standing vigil. But clearly what's going to happen in Westminster Hall is they're talking about airport security, but you can't stop and strip search everybody, can you? I mean,
you can't stop and strip search everybody. You can put them through
metal detectors.
But the security operation will be far, far wider than that. There will be threat and risk assessments being prepared by our own internal security service, by MI6.
Yep.
There'll be liaison with foreign intelligence services from right across the world. It's probably the biggest single international event ever. And who knows what the threats are against some of the more distant countries until we ask.
Yeah. And the American president being told that he's going to have sort of, well, not quite get on a minibus, but I think we're going to provide accommodation for the American president to get to the cathedral. But numbers, huge numbers of people. What happens if hundreds of thousands of people just fill up London? What on earth do the police do in a situation like that?
The police will manage them. People are going to be good-natured. This is not going to be any sort of protest event. This is not protesting against the community charge or something like that. This is people wanting to come, to be respectful, to pay their respects, to be part of a historic event. This is not a public order problem. It's a problem of facilitating people to do what they perfectly legitimately want to do.
So these are people that might just take an instruction?
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure they will.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. I do hope so. And in terms of, you mentioned MI6, liaison with foreign intelligence. I mean, how does it work? Do the security services sort of literally check every facing building? Or, I mean, how do they do this work?
That won't be a job for the security service. That will be a job for the police.
Will it? OK.
Indeed, I've done that job myself many years ago for some state events. And it is a matter of looking at the principal buildings, what their contingency plans are, what their security is, to make sure that a stranger doesn't get into the building and have a good sight down onto an event. And most of these things are routine. It is only a matter of making sure they're up to date, making sure that they know what they're doing.
So that work's already been done?
Most of that's already been done. It will need to be looked at again, and I'm sure it is being looked at again now.
Yeah. And a new boss of the Met just taken over?
Yeah, it's a tricky time for the new boss to take over, but the reality is...
Tell me about him. Mark Rowley, tell me about him.
Unusually, a maths graduate, Cambridge maths graduate. He's a bright cookie. Wide experience both in the Met and in Surrey. He was a very successful Assistant Commissioner Counter-Terrorism and retired very honourably, got a knighthood, went into industry and has now come back to serve. Londoners could do a great deal worse than Mark Rowley.
Yeah, it's a very, very broad breadth of experience of life, isn't it?
It's a very broad breadth.
But what a time to take over. I mean, he takes over with the biggest operation you say London almost may ever have seen.
He does, but he has a very good team working for him, and that team have been working for this event for, as I say, decades. And, you know, since we knew exactly when it was going to happen, everybody will be working in overdrive.
Gosh, I want to tell you what, I wish him well. Stephen Roberts, as ever, thank you for coming and joining us. And it's going to be...
welcome.
It's going to be... I tell you what, the police are not going to get much time off, are they?
They're going to have long days for several days.
And nights.
And nights, oh yes. Some people will probably be working 20-odd hours a day.
Just to get this over the line.
Just to get it done.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, it's not often we say anything nice about the police, but, well, it's true, isn't it? Because, you know, if things go well, that's what we expect the police to do. But let's wish them well over the course of this next week.
This will go well. Everybody wants this to go well.
I love the confidence. I think it's absolutely terrific. Stephen, thank you very much indeed. So we can see, looking back at the pictures from the Royal Vigil in Edinburgh, that the King is, there he is, absolutely barely moving, looking down at the ground, but literally barely moving. And it is really, really powerful stuff. I have to say, I think anyone watching this has to be filled with admiration on a human level. How do these people manage to hold their composure in a public situation the way that they do? I remember thinking that back at the time of the Diana funeral, as they all marched through the streets of London, including those boys. They really do have something about them. Now, music, of course. The national anthem, much has been made of that, and I'm joined by Frederica Krum, who is an opera singer of German origin, but lives in London, has been here a long time, and there is, Frederica, quite a crossover, isn't there, of German families, German royalty, British royalty.
Yeah, they're all a bit mixed.
Well, but we're going back to the House of Hanover and all these... Saxe-Coburg, all of these things. So incredibly close relations, but also musically there's quite a relationship between the Germans and the British, and particularly when it comes to royalty. Now, as an opera singer, I understand you've already done a rendition of God Save the King.
I have indeed. I recorded it a few days back in the Royal Hospital Chelsea Chapel, and it hasn't been sung there, of course, for over 70 years.
Yes.
So it was a very special feeling, a bit eerie. One always feels disloyal in a sense of singing suddenly God Save the King. But I think it is amazing, and we're going to enjoy singing it many times.
The vigil has now ended. The four children of the late Queen have now completed their 20-minute vigil and are walking out of St Giles. Sorry to interrupt.
That's absolutely fine.
Yeah. So, Frederica, yes, I mean, God Save the King, as you say, it's not been sung for 70 years. So you've sung it, you've recorded it.
I've sung it, I've recorded it, and it felt very special. It's a moment in history, really.
It is. Now, I suppose, given you were in the Royal Hospital Chelsea,
yes,
there will be quite a few people in there who do remember the days before the Queen, of course.
Of course,
and
yes.
who would have served King and Country and would have sung God Save the King. What did they make of it all?
Well, they're all, of course, very moved. I mean, Her Majesty the Queen had a very close connection with the Royal Hospital Chelsea. Yeah. She did as well attend Founders Parade, and most of the Chelsea pensioners have met the Queen over the years. And all the royal family have a very close connection with the Chelsea pensioners. So they're all, of course, everybody, the nation, the world, we all mourn an incredible woman and an incredible monarch.
No, absolutely.
So,
I mean,
yes.
an example to the world. I mean, in the most remarkable way. Now, the Queen has been rather a fan of your singing in the past.
I wouldn't go quite that far. I mean, I would love to take that credit, but she loved Gershwin. I mean, the royal family, specifically her mother, the late Queen Mother, she had a great fondness for George Gershwin. So Her Majesty the Queen did grow up listening to Gershwin songs all through her childhood, youth.
Yes.
And so I did send her my album when I recorded my Gershwin album, and I got a lovely, lovely letter back. So that was very special.
Well, to get a letter from the Queen to say that she enjoyed your album, I reckon that's pretty cool.
That is indeed.
Yeah, no, I think that really is something special. Now, there will be a coronation.
Indeed.
That will take place in a year or so's time. And what's the big piece of music going to be?
I should imagine Handel, and I'm sure he will enjoy it because he's lying in Westminster.
He is. Just tell the audience a little bit more.
Well, it is the very famous coronation mass, Zodiac, from Handel, who, like me, German, ended up in Britain and loved it so much he never came back. I think it is one of the most powerful music pieces chosen for that reason for the coronation. It has this slow build up and then the big famous choir end at the end, God Save the King. I mean, it can't get any bigger.
It's going to be quite some moment, I have to say.
Yes.
Frederica Krum, thank you for coming in and joining us.
My pleasure.
Keeping this tradition of Anglo-German royalty going and the music associated.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Just give me one second. And now let's get the news, headlines, and after that, I'll be back with you for the next hour.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening from the GB Newsroom. King Charles has stood vigil next to his mother's coffin at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. He was joined by his siblings during a process called the Vigil of Princes. Thousands of people have already been filing past Her Majesty to view her coffin and pay tribute. The Queen will lie in rest at St Giles Cathedral for the next 24 hours before she's taken to London. Earlier, the King visited the Scottish Parliament where he and the Queen Consort received a motion of condolence. After 2 minutes' silence, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon reflected on the Queen's life and her close bond with Scotland. The King responded by promising to follow in his mother's example.
My mother felt, as I do, the greatest admiration for the Scottish people, for their magnificent achievements and their indomitable spirit. And it was the greatest comfort for her to know, in turn, the true affection in which she was held. The knowledge of that deep and abiding bond must be to us a solace as we mourn the end of a life of incomparable service.
King Charles and other members of the royal family also led a procession today following his mother's coffin along the Royal Mile in Edinburgh. It was taken from Holyrood House to St Giles Cathedral, where a remembrance service was held. During the service, Elder of the Church of Scotland, Morag Milne, thanked God for the Queen's long life.
With all our hearts, we thank you for the long life, the shining example, the steadfast commitment to duty, the strong faith, and the good humour of our wise and great Queen.
And this morning in London, the King Charles attended Westminster Hall, where both Houses of Parliament expressed their condolences.
Your Majesty, I welcome you and Her Majesty the Queen Consort to Parliament today on this solemn occasion.
In reply, the King said he was deeply grateful for their addresses and described Parliament as a living and breathing instrument of democracy. This is GB News. Back now to Nigel.
Well, it's been a hugely busy day for King Charles III. The vigil in St Giles's Cathedral in Edinburgh has now finished. I think with that, King Charles's day is over. I'm going to find out the answer to that by joining at Holyrood Darren McCaffrey, GB News' political editor. Darren, just take our viewers and listeners through the day that King Charles III has had, please.
Well, in many ways, Nigel, actually, I'm going to start, if I can, with what's just happened, and then I'll go back to this morning. First of all, in the last couple of minutes, in fact, the King and senior members of the royal family have literally just driven by in the last couple of minutes, leaving St Giles's Cathedral behind me, where thousands of people are now lining up. I think the queue's a mile long to pass by Her Majesty the Queen's coffin. quite incredible images. We've seen some momentous moments in the last couple of days, but I think those images of His Majesty the King, the Duke of York, the Earl of Sussex, Wessex, sorry, I should say, and the Princess Royal, Princess Anne, standing guard for 20 minutes next to their mum's coffin in the cathedral behind me, as members of the public pass by, is a real moment, a very, very powerful moment. And you could tell, you know, it really, really, you could see it etched on their face, what it meant to them. And we do forget this sometimes, don't we, Nigel? You know, they are senior members of the royal family, but they have lost their mum. Let's not forget this. And you could really feel that tonight as they stood guard there for 20 minutes. And Edinburgh tonight, there are thousands and thousands of people still on the streets, as I say, including the thousands that are lining up to pass by that coffin, which will sit in, or rest I should say, in this cathedral until late tomorrow afternoon. Let me take you through what's happened though earlier on today. The King began his day in London at Westminster Hall, one of the oldest buildings in the country, in Parliament, addressing both Houses of Parliament, the House of Commons and the House of Lords, hearing speeches from the Lord Speaker and the House of Commons Speaker, but essentially addressing parliamentarians, committing himself to the constitutional democracy we live in, and that's a real key fundamental reminder of the constitution that we find ourselves in. You know, monarchy's relationship with Parliament is key. And then he travelled up here to Scotland, in which he had the ceremony of keys, in which he was essentially given the freedom of this city. And then his brothers, his sister, walked up the Royal Mile here in Edinburgh, the medieval Royal Mile with its cobbled streets, with the streets thronged with thousands of people, 10, 15 deep in places, in almost silence, quite incredibly, for nearly 30 minutes. There was the odd round of applause here and there, but mostly in silence, as the Queen's hearse moved up the Royal Mile to St Giles Cathedral, where we had a ceremony of celebration at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Yes, there were tributes, and yes, it's a period of remembrance, but ultimately it was a celebration of Her Majesty's 96 years on this planet, 70 years as our head of state. And then later on this afternoon, the King addressed MSPs, members of the Scottish Parliament, down in Holyrood. And again, it's a reminder of the different constituent parts of our constitution. The Scottish titles that he had as Prince of Wales have now been conferred to his own son, who's the new Prince of Wales, and the Prince of Argyll, for example. So it is that continuity and that relationship, that particular relationship with Scotland, that the King, King Charles III, wanted to convey today.
Yeah, well, it's been an amazing day for him. And Darren, it seems, I mean, just given the huge pace that he's expected to meet, he seems to be standing up to it remarkably well.
Yeah, indeed. And there is no end in sight. You know, again, I'll remind viewers, this is a man who's lost his mother last week. And yet, because of the constitutional situation he's found himself in, of course, he immediately became the monarch, the head of state of this country. He's had to meet the Prime Minister, he's had to meet the Cabinet, he's had to meet the Archbishop of Canterbury. He is the head of the Church of England and the Church of Scotland. He is in Scotland today. He will be in Northern Ireland tomorrow. He will then be back in London. He'll be in Wales on Friday. And that's all before, of course, the funeral next Monday. As you say, pretty relentless. And yes, this has been the longest apprenticeship in the world, hasn't it? He's been preparing this for 70 years of his life, and he is prepared for it. But he is also 73. And he's not having much time in many regards to grieve, time to himself. It is a relentless schedule, and it's one that, frankly, is not going to end next week. This is his new life as king, and it's clear that he wants to be a king that is among his people. And I suspect that we will see him travel much more around this country, and indeed to the other realms and the Commonwealth countries in the weeks, months and years to come.
Darren McCaffrey, thank you very much indeed, and I agree with that. I suspect he'll be in Australia pretty quickly. Some of your thoughts that have come through. Audrey says, such a wonderful scene to see the late Queen's children stand vigil at their mum's coffin. So reverent and so moving. Keith says, just my personal thoughts, but Monday should not be a day when we throw flowers and applaud. We should, as the coffin goes by, take the knee or bow our heads momentarily in respect. Well, that's one thing I probably would take the knee for. Princess Anne, says Marianne, looks so desperately sad. And as much as King Charles does his best to restrain his emotions, he really has showed his warm and human side. It was nice to see. Lovely for them to be together. And frankly, there are more and more messages coming in. I can't possibly read out even a small percentage of them, but please do keep them coming in. Now, we focused a lot on big capital cities today, but let's have a look at what happened today in Nottingham. Will Hollis has been there finding out.
Well, we've been seeing a lot of palaces up and down the country where people have been laying tributes, flowers, Paddington Bear toys, and it's exactly the same here in Nottingham, because on that balcony just up there, in 1946, that's when Princess Elizabeth first visited Nottingham before she was even a queen. So this has a very significant place in British culture, but in Nottingham culture, because the Queen used to visit here on many different occasions, and that's why you're seeing flowers up and down here as well, from people in Nottingham, the East Midlands, from across Britain, but people have been coming from around the world. And I think this couple over here, Andrew and Tony, you're from America and you just happen to be visiting Nottingham right now at this quite unfortunate time in British history. What does it mean to you as Americans seeing the passing of the monarch?
It's sad. It's very, very sad. I mean, she's actually been there for 70 years. You know, that's the only thing we've ever known, really, is Queen Elizabeth. It's just a sad moment. You know, you actually feel the sadness in the country.
And it's the same in America, from maybe your family and friends that are there right now experiencing this on the other side of the pond?
Everybody's watching it all over the world. It's a very special moment, and I feel very lucky to be here.
And what do you think about the tributes here, what you're seeing here in Nottingham, but what you're seeing on the TV as well?
It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. Matter of fact, my mother comes from Nottingham, and my daughter's got her grandmother's cup, the 1953 Coronation Cup, and she just texted us a picture of it to show us that she still has it. But I mean, it's just amazing here. It's totally amazing.
It's quite incredible to see the connection for people that are from the Commonwealth, for friends and family that I have in New Zealand and Australia and Canada. You can understand why they're so touched by it. Can you explain to me why America and Americans are so touched by the passing of the Queen?
She's the only one we've ever known for this country. She has somehow found a way to close the gap for so many countries. It's just amazing.
She's an icon. Yeah, that's the best way to put it. You know,
and it's something that a lot of Americans, not just you, will be feeling quite close to your heart right now.
Yes, all over Facebook, everybody's making comments about it. And so many that wish they could be here. And
this is obviously a floral tribute on the council steps. There's also condolences, book of condolences inside. Have you signed that yet?
Yes, we sure did. Yes.
Yes, we signed the book.
If you don't mind, what did you write in here?
Go ahead, tell her.
God bless you. Thank you for your service, and rest in peace.
Very beautiful words, and I think sometimes short and simple is all you really need. Thank you so much for being here and sharing this experience with us. It does show that it is a truly international experience, the passing of the Queen, and I think it's something that's going to carry on throughout the weeks, and we're going to see lots of people from around the world and Nottingham clearly upset by this.
Well, that was Will Hollis in Nottingham, but frankly, you could have gone to any major town or city across anywhere in the United Kingdom and found that reaction today. Interestingly, you also could have found it around much of the world. This is truly a global event. Remember, she was just the Queen. She was known as that right across the world. Lots and lots of your reactions coming in, and a lot of them really do fascinate me, I must say. Peter says, never has so much been owed by so many to one sovereign. I rather like that. Goodbye, Your Majesty. Dave says, what has fascinated me is to see constitutional monarchy explained and seen in action. The Accession Council and the proclamations were absolutely fascinating and interesting. Do you know what, Dave? They really were, weren't they? We haven't seen them for 70 years. For me, a very special moment was seeing King Charles enter Westminster Hall. The sovereign in Parliament. That is our system. That is what we developed in the late 1600s. And yes, we had civil wars and a much smaller revolution that came after that. That is the unique system of government we developed. And of course, it needs to be amended at times, updated and changed, but the fundamental principles of that constitutional monarchy are strong. And I think in many ways, because we haven't seen these ceremonies for 70 years, I think in many ways we simply just took the whole thing for granted. I'm not going to get political. I'm trying not to get political, but I can tell all of you that for me, that was a moment because that was what I was fighting for. I was fighting for our system, something that I think is unique, very, very special, and was not to be thrown away, albeit to Brussels or Strasbourg or anywhere else. And that for me was a real, real highlight. And I'm going to keep going with some of these because, you know, some of these things are really, really powerful, really, really strong. You know, desperately wanted to pay my respects, but old age and semi-infirmity prevents attendance. But I'm going to plant 2 trees, says Joy, one for Her Majesty and one for my late husband, who died in 2020. And isn't it interesting? The death of the Queen somehow brings people's own personal sadnesses or even tragedies home to them. Now, we did see on the Royal Mile today a couple of protesters, and I'm going to emphasise a couple of protesters. You know, Darren McCaffrey just made the point that for half an hour, members of the royal family walked behind the coffin up that ancient street, and it was generally, as it is outside Buckingham Palace, generally complete silence. But there were 1 or 2 protesters there today, carrying banners. One chap shouting abuse at Prince Andrew. Well, that's perhaps not wholly surprising. But I wondered, and I've speculated already on this programme, I wondered whether there could be a wave of republicanism within this country, and I wondered what it means for the whole of the Commonwealth, because there's not much doubt the Commonwealth would never have held without the devotion of Queen Elizabeth II. Well, joining me is Peter Whittle, former member of the London Assembly, but these days busy with the new Culture Forum. Peter, welcome to the programme.
Thank you, Nigel.
I meant what I said a few minutes ago. I felt the King in Parliament.
Yes.
It is our system. It is absolutely unique. You couldn't design it. It sort of evolved over a period of time. And the point about a constitutional monarch is that they are politically neutral, and the Queen played that game beautifully. But all through history, there have been those that don't like this system. And perhaps the truth is, republicanism, UK republicanism, has actually been smaller in our lifetimes than very often it was in times gone by.
Absolutely. The last time it was big was in Queen Victoria's reign, around about mid-19th century, when she went into this retirement because of Prince Albert's death, and people got fed up with it, and there were Republican clubs all over the country. But of course, that went again when she came out of retirement, and there were the Jubilees. The thing is, Nigel, so I've written quite a lot about this, with republicanism, it is in some ways an honourable creed. I mean, it doesn't mean people aren't patriotic if they're Republican.
Peter, that's interesting. I'm going to stop you for a moment there. So Tony Benn once ticked me off. We took a paddle somewhere, and Tony Benn ticked me off. He said to me, just because I'm a Republican doesn't mean I'm not a patriot. I flew a Spitfire, you know. I thought, right, OK, I stand corrected on this. So, yes, I completely understand that it can be a perfectly reasonable, honourable, and in its own way, patriotic position. What I'm talking about is the new hard left.
Oh, right, yes.
Which is, frankly, Marxism, which wants to bring the whole country down.
Well, they want to bring the whole country down. I mean, mixing 2 points up in a way here, because the fact is, you were mentioning earlier there in your introduction, Nigel, about how wonderful it was to see the King in Parliament and to see all these ceremonies. These are coming new to probably most of the population. It hasn't happened for 70 years. I can't think of a better way of strengthening our culture. Like you, I don't want to be political, but let's face it, over the past, 5 years, our history and our great achievements, they have all been pretty much under attack.
Under constant attack.
Constant attack. And so suddenly we're seeing them in their full glory. I have found it in some ways the most moving part of it. When it comes to Republicans, yes, a lot of it is, as you say, the hard left, who want to basically destroy pretty much everything. You know, it's not just the monarchy. I think that they have miscalculated in some ways, because the sort of Republicans who are very active now, they saw as their big trump card, their big argument was Prince Charles, and that he was going to be terrible, and they would never ever attack the Queen. There was never any mileage in that. No. But they were sort of biding their time. What's happened is that Charles seems to have seamlessly gone into this position so far, and more importantly, there is an enormous apparent public respect for the way he's doing it. So they've miscalculated on that front. And I think that the monarchy is coming out of this stronger. The only thing I hope doesn't happen is that I hope that all these reports that we hear about Charles wanting to make it slim down, a smaller monarchy along the Scandinavian lines.
But isn't it pretty small already?
Well, it is in terms of numbers. Look, do you remember, we're roughly the same age, when we were growing up, there was the Duke of this, the Duke of that, there was the extended family. Now it is actually a relatively small amount. But when you talk about a smaller monarchy, it really sort of, I see it as meaning cutting down on the pomp, cutting down on the ceremony, cutting down on all of those things. That would be a huge mistake, I think, because one of the reasons there has been this amazing reaction to the Queen's death and to Charles' succession is because of a big monarchy. It is
perhaps he'll get that message then.
I would hope so, because I think it would be just at the very time when we are in an entirely new era, we're in an entirely new political era, and more importantly, so many things are under attack. We need actually continuity.
I mean, for balance, Charles hasn't been doing this for very long.
No, that's fine. But I think in an odd way, look, I was no great fan of Charles, actually. I have been impressed in his speech when he was broadcasting to the nation. And he made it quite clear in that kind of rather muted way that, in fact, he understood exactly what the constitutional conventions were and that he wasn't, he was going to uphold them. I took that to mean I know that I'm not going to be kind of like raising my head, over the parapet to talk about things. So I took kind of great comfort from that. One thing as well, as I say, about all of these ceremonies we've been seeing, one of your viewers there said it's, you've had constitutional monarchy explained to you.
Yes.
And that has been very evident. But at the same time, I've been struck. I live in Windsor now, Nigel, and I've been struck.
Well, you clearly, as a royalist, you would, obviously.
Oh, exactly. At the epicentre, really. I've been struck by the numbers of young people, young families, coming and putting flowers down. And again, they've never known anyone else, but they are also learning history, possibly for the first time. I think this is so valuable. And it's a terrible, an awful way to learn it, maybe.
Yeah.
But if there is a silver lining, it is that.
Yes, and I think perhaps in Scotland as well. The fact that,
yes,
all of this has been in Scotland until tomorrow. And I think, yes, I sense it may. Andrew Neil wrote at the weekend he thought Charles would be the end of the Union, but I'm not so sure.
No, I would have thought that once, but actually it's very odd looking at those scenes in Scotland, looking at the scenes in Aberdeen and in Edinburgh. Obviously people always turn out for big events, but actually, I was surprised. I've been surprised. And I think it might change the general dynamic.
Well, we'll see. But where there will be a problem is in the realms.
Yeah.
I suspect. I think the Australians will have a re-examination of constitutional monarchy, although, frankly, the alternative is a very dreary, clapped-out ex-politician. I mean, I used to, 20 years ago around universities, I get asked this question, and I said, well, what do you want, President Kinnock? Because that's what you'd finish up with. You'd finish up with somebody from either side of the divide, but it would be fairly dreary. They'd barely even be household names.
Well, they wouldn't.
So that may, but the one that worries me is Barbados remove the Queen as head of state without a referendum as a direct result of the Chinese Communist Party lending them large sums of money. We're seeing the Chinese Communist Party, Chinese government, trying to use Commonwealth countries, bribing them money, looking to build naval bases, etc. And already there have been in the West Indies 1 or 2 calls to change their constitutional arrangements. Keeping the Commonwealth together, Peter, will be much harder, in my opinion.
Oh, I think it was obviously her life's work. If you had to point to one achievement of the Queen that stood out, it was actually the Commonwealth. I think the point has to keep being made about the Commonwealth that it is entirely voluntary, right? Because the way that people talk about it now, particularly radicals talk about it, is as though somehow, and the American media, I might say.
Well, the New York Times in particular.
New York Times and MSNBC and all these people, is that it's somehow some colonial kind of hangover. It is entirely voluntary. I will agree, it's going to be a tough call for him. But I think that, again, we might be surprised if he prioritises it. Gosh, I think he seems to be.
He's going to be very busy, isn't he?
Well, yes. Let's hope he's got energy of, what is he, 74 now, 73?
Yeah, no, he's got a lot to do. Peter Whittle, thank you for your thoughts and your positivity about the monarchy in this country.
Thank you.
Let's cross live to Buckingham Palace and speak to Alice Porter. Alice, bring us up to date there, please.
Hi there. Well, I have to say the tributes just keep coming. I mean, as you can see, it's dark now, but people still keep coming. And actually, just an hour ago, I was going to have a look at some of the floral tributes that people have been placing. I hadn't had a chance yet. And I think for those of you who are watching, we can see some of those pictures now. Really was incredible seeing people coming, putting these flowers down. And it was the most beautiful array of flowers, but also what I really loved was the personal touches. There was some child had left a little hobby horse, which was of course a sort of ode to the Queen, who's obviously was such a fan of horse racing, and it really was extraordinary seeing so many people of all ages and backgrounds coming together and laying these flowers. The cellophane has all been taken off and they've been just arranged beautifully in Green Park. So we've had crowds gathering here, but also the crowds gathering on Lambeth Bridge 48 hours ahead of when the Queen's coffin will be lying in state there. I understand people are already gathering on the bridge, including a former butler of the Queen, which is absolutely extraordinary. And again, I think, like with the floral tributes there, I think it shows that how the monarchy, and particularly the Queen, has been able to unify people of so many different backgrounds. And that's something that's really struck me today when I was looking around Green Park and seeing the floral tributes, is people of all ages, all classes, all backgrounds, all coming together, and it really shows how the royal family has been this unifying force. But while we've seen crowds today, we're going to be seeing even more of them tomorrow at Buckingham Palace, because that is when the Queen's coffin will be transported from Edinburgh to RAF Northolt, and then it will make its way here to Buckingham Palace, where it will be met by King Charles and the Queen Consort, who will have an enormously busy schedule tomorrow, going from Edinburgh to Belfast to Buckingham Palace, where they will meet the coffin, as well as the Prince and Princess of Wales. And the coffin will be at Buckingham Palace overnight. Now, it's no surprise that Buckingham Palace has become such an extraordinary focal point for so many people paying tribute to the Queen, because it is, of course, an historic place for the royal family, including during World War II. And I've been having a look at what the Queen's experienced during the Second World War, and I think we can watch that now.
She was known throughout the world as Queen Elizabeth II, but during World War II, it was Princess Auto Mechanic which hit the headlines, as she was the first female member of the royal family to serve in the armed forces as a driver and mechanic in the Auxiliary Territorial Service.
We were getting towards the end of the war. The war had essentially been won. The British knew that, and therefore it was key that the British royal family associated themselves with the forces in some way at this point in time. So Elizabeth, it was part of a broader sort of publicity drive to make her, if you like, connect with the forces in some way.
But growing up during the war had its challenges, even for the royal family.
Buckingham Palace has been bombed again. But this kind of
Buckingham Palace was hit during aerial bomb attacks, so Elizabeth and her sister Margaret were evacuated to Windsor Castle, 20 miles outside of London. Despite living in the shadow of the war, the young princesses attempted to carry on their lives as normal. even putting on pantomimes.
Princess Elizabeth did play the male lead, so we have, for example, her costume from the role of Aladdin, taking the lead character in that. But by the time of 1944, the final pantomime, which was Old Mother Red Riding Boots, Her Majesty was 18 years old, and I think the feeling was that it would be more appropriate for her to play a female lead instead of a male lead by that stage. But I think it was, it certainly feels like a very unique moment in the Queen's life, and certainly in the life of the castle, and during that very interesting period of the Second World War.
As she grew up, the princess began to take on more royal duties and was given the role of honorary colonel of the Grenadier Guards on her 16th birthday. On the 8th of May 1945, the war in Europe ended. In London, tens of thousands of people took to the streets outside Buckingham Palace, where the King and Queen greeted them from the balcony. But for Princess Elizabeth and her sister, that's not where the celebrations ended.
19-year-old Princess Elizabeth and her sister were able to slip out of the palace gates here and join the crowds of people which were all gathered here enjoying the festivities. It's understood that Princess Elizabeth even pulled down her uniform cap over her eyes to avoid being recognised. And then the group made their way up to the Ritz, where it's even rumoured that the two princesses joined in with dancing the conga.
The Queen later said that the celebrations were one of the most memorable nights of her life, which for someone who lived through so much is really saying something. Alice Porter, GB News.
Well, my thanks to Alice Porter, and what a beautiful package of the Queen in wartime. It's still quite difficult to get into our heads that when we have this funeral next Friday, that this woman was on the balcony on VE Day with Winston Churchill and George VI. It is just quite totally extraordinary. And I think those pictures and those films from the mid-1940s really are something. Now, I was talking earlier about the King in Parliament and how great I thought it was. Well, somebody who was there was Baroness Emma Nicholson, MBE. Emma, good evening.
Very much indeed, Nigel.
What a moment. You're there in Westminster Hall and the King arrives. What was it like?
Well, it was absolutely stunning. The night before, we had a taster of this because we had a parliamentary evensong in St Margaret's, Westminster, which you know well. Yeah. And so for the very first time at the end of that service, we all stood up and sang God Save the King. And it was incredibly difficult when you got to the last line and had stopped concentrating to actually say King instead of Queen.
Yes.
And that, in a sense, drove it home to us. A little bit like Her Majesty had said on the funeral of her husband, if you remember, Prince Philip. She said it hit home when the piper piped him out. And that was when it really hit home. And last night in St Margaret's, Westminster, us parliamentarians all jumbled up together with some of our assistants. We suddenly stood up at the end and sang God Save the King.
Yeah, wow.
So today, here he was with us. It was a huge experience. We were so lucky. And of course, it being Parliament and the military and everything and all the guards and everything, it went simply impeccably. Not a single thing was wrong. And yet, it was extraordinarily homely. That's really, I think, is the gift of all of this handing over, is that we knew it was going to come. We didn't expect it. We don't want it in that sense. And yet it's happened. And here is King Charles III.
Yes, and there he was with you this morning, and then he goes up to Edinburgh, where he has to process behind the coffin, speak in the Scottish Parliament, stand vigil in St Giles's Cathedral. I mean, he does seem to be doing very well.
Well, this morning, I happened to be at the end of the row in the middle, just by luck, sitting by Lord Brownlow, and he walked right past us. And he looked so strong, majestic, but also still himself. This is going to be a wonderful kingship, and of course different from his late mother, the late Queen, but nonetheless he's going to be an absolute stunner. I've been lucky enough to work with him on various charitable initiatives over the years, and of course he's been absolutely miraculous. Prince's Trust, yes, but also many other charities, many other smaller initiatives. And he's been just like his parents, ploughing his own furrow, but giving commitment and love and kindness and amusement and thoughtfulness and listening to all sorts and conditions of men. It's been absolutely amazing.
Interesting. That is interesting. I mean, you know, I was just talking a moment ago about the monarchy within the United Kingdom, and I think it is very strong. I think it will remain strong. But my concern, Emma, is the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is the Queen's extraordinary achievement.
But they voted him in. They voted him in to take her place.
Yes.
And not today, not yesterday, not last year, but quite a little while ago, they decided they wanted Prince Charles when he became the king. So it's their choice. And when you look at President Trudeau, for example, almost in tears.
Yes.
Yes. The Commonwealth is very, very strong. You know, I have a passion for Iraq. I want Iraq to join the Commonwealth of Nations. It's such a fantastic organisation. Really, really wonderful. And I must say, if I was a boxer, I would punch the New York Times and the Washington Post. I cannot believe it. And thank goodness President Biden, for all his different views of life. I'm so pleased that all the flags are half-mast for the USA, which really feels strong to us. And he quoted it in 9/11, the day after Her Majesty died. And on top of that, he's coming to the funeral.
Yes.
And President Putin remarked also about the loss of the Queen. So the Queen was everyone's mother. It's most extraordinary. I've had messages, you know, I work in funny countries, in difficult places, and with poor people everywhere. I've had messages right the way through, down the line, from all over, everywhere. Please pass on our love for Her Majesty and our wish that the new king is successful. There's no need to wish it. He is successful already.
So could we make more of the Commonwealth? You say it's a fantastic organisation. Could we do more with the Commonwealth in terms of trade or...
To be honest, I think we should certainly do more with the Commonwealth, and I believe we should do much more with the British Council as well. I don't like to say this, but I think actually, as Britons, we undervalue ourselves. We undervalue what we have to offer. We allow ourselves to be seen as these wicked, evil, ex-colonialist people, as the New York Times put it.
Every day!
Rather ruder, more ruder than I would like to say. You know? Let me tell you my lovely story about the Queen.
Please.
I was born deaf, which is just one of those things, you know, it doesn't matter a scrap. Maybe that's why I have such a loud voice. In any case, it gives me the opportunity to lip read the opposition in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, which is quite funny. But Her Majesty was patron from a very early age of the Mary Hare School for the Deaf, which is Britain's best deaf school and probably one of the top 2 in the globe. All the children who go seem to end up with magnificent university degrees. And she came down very early on in her reign, and there the children were, 600 of them in the gym, waiting for that sports day heroine to come. And the Duke came, and they came in a fraction early. So she sat very quietly on the stage, and Prince Philip suddenly whispered something in her ear. 600 children howled with laughter, lifting the roof, because, of course, they lip-read what Prince Philip had said. And the whole of the grown-ups sat frozen with horror. And it must have been the most happy occasion for those deaf children everywhere. And that's how I've seen Her Majesty, Her late Majesty, and King Charles behave with absolutely everyone, small or large, mean or grand. They see the individual person and the group. They're very remarkable royal family. My goodness, we're lucky.
No, I mean, I must say we've been incredibly lucky with Elizabeth. I mean, unbelievable. I was just saying a moment ago, you know, VE Day, she's on the balcony, Winston Churchill is her first Prime Minister. I mean, it's an incredible story.
And she got up specifically to bid farewell to Boris Johnson and to welcome the new Prime Minister. And then I think she felt she'd done her business.
I mean, it's extraordinary. Are you, I mean, perhaps not you, but are you surprised by the level of grief that there's been in the country?
No, but I was very fortunate to work a little bit with her, to serve her a little bit, and even more fortunate to spend quite a number of years doing bits and pieces with King Charles. So no, the love and respect that they create is absolutely limitless and vast. And what is so peculiar is the way that the media have just chosen to say nasty things all the time. I don't want a sycophantic media. I remember once in Africa staying in bed while somebody brought me some breakfast in an actual tyrant's little palace, you know. And 3 mornings wondering, I read the newspaper and said to myself, what a wonderful country, everybody is happy. Then I suddenly realised it was being printed in the basement of the tyrant. So, OK, that's not our newspaper, but nonetheless I would like them to be a little bit more thoughtful and to not just go just for the nasty thing.
Well, the one person that has had a lot of nasty things written and said about her, certainly 20 years ago, was Camilla. Now, I mean, what a tough time she had.
Worse than tough. And on top of that, the new Duchess, the new Camilla, Camilla's absolutely awful. Her whole family as well must have suffered. But, I mean, she's come through, you know, and others do as well. But it's an awful sort of long haul they have to go through, being bombarded all the time.
Yes.
But Her Majesty the Queen sailed on, regardless, didn't bother to argue back, just got on with doing the job. In my little speech I had about a couple of minutes in the House of Lords yesterday, I quoted some Shakespeare, because he always has the best words of anyone, in which he was saying, this aged princess who never let a day go by without a good deed. Now, he phrased that rather better than I've just said it, but that, I think, typified the late Queen Elizabeth II. Never did she lose an opportunity to do something. And she was also enormously funny as well. So, I mean, she had it all. She was unique, but I tell you what, we've got a unique king now, too, in Charles III.
Baroness Nicholson, thank you for joining us and paying those tributes to our, I guess we have to call her our late Queen, I suppose we have. It's sort of difficult to say.
Well, it's not, I know, but she's in heaven.
And God save the King.
And you know, the Queen's weather in the Isle of Man, when the Queen arrives, a cloud and light rain arrives as well to shelter her so that her enemies don't see that she's there. I thought of that when the announcement of her death was made.
Yeah.
What then happened, the Queen's weather produced a double rainbow.
Yeah, it was lovely, wasn't it? Yeah.
Unbelievably beautiful, yes. So off she was to Prince Philip.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. That was very, very well said and very, very nice too. Now, joining me next is Di Davis, former head of Royal Protection, and he joins me down the line. Di, good evening. Welcome to GB News. You must be feeling this loss pretty personally.
Well, yes, I share everyone else's view on this, that we have lost 1 in a million, or rather 1 in many millions, and never, ever to be replaced. Our generation, my generation, I don't think has an equivalent. And I don't think, frankly, we will have an equivalent. But yes, for a little boy from Carnarvon in North Wales to be selected to take command and to then unify 3 divisions was a huge honour. Something I still pinch myself that I got the job. But I was fortunate. I had a fantastic team. And today's Royalty Protection Command does the same job. And we saw them in Scotland today. Much smaller event, but I think it lays the foundation of the much larger events that we're going to see over the next few days, and obviously culminating in the funeral. But yeah, it's been a fantastic time. I still lecture on the history of the royal family, the attacks on them. And Nigel, you wouldn't believe, or perhaps you do, the number of attacks that have been from George III and earlier, but up until now. It is quite incredible. And I'm pleased to be able to say and tell people some of it as much as I can do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very difficult combination, Di, isn't it? That on the one hand, you want the royal family to be seen, you want the royal family to meet and interact with the public, and they want to meet and interact with the public as the public does with them. But it's a very difficult call, isn't it? I mean, you know, there was King Charles III, the Queen Consort, They arrived outside Buckingham Palace, the car stopped, they went and met the crowd. It's a very tough balance to allow them to be close to the public and yet to keep them safe.
Well, it is, but they've learned the art. Certainly, Princess Anne, when she was attacked in 1974, that was a game changer. And one of the key things that was actually introduced in those days was the backup teams, those officers who go forward and aft whenever they go somewhere. They act as the eyes and ears, and you could see them today. They're very experienced police officers before they even get to royalty protection. They go through an intensive training in a wide variety of activity. So I have great faith in them. They've rarely let anyone down, particularly Her Majesty. And I think in conjunction with the new commissioner, the events will go well. But it does take a huge amount of preparation, training, and carrying out reconnaissance. Everywhere they go has to be reconnoitred before they go. And you look at all the aspects that could go wrong. And of course, in this country, even today, we have a number of individuals who are pro-terrorism, would activate a terrorist attack given half the chance. So we cannot ever rest on our laurels, in my opinion.
In terms of scale, Di, the event next Monday, I mean, is this the biggest thing in security terms we've yet had to deal with, or are there comparisons going back through the years?
I'm quite old now, even older than you, Nigel, if I may say so. And no, I can't remember anything quite as big as what I anticipate. Princess Diana's funeral was huge. I and my colleagues, many of us, did not anticipate the large numbers that turned out. But it went well in the terms as much as a funeral can. This time, I think we've got to look even more carefully at the safety, not only of the royals, but the safety of people coming. That will be a key factor. And people are laughing and talking about VIPs coming in buses. Well, there is precedent for that. But you have to then ensure that those who really need protection, i.e. the President of the United States, whether you like him or not, he is one of the greatest global threats. We've got to protect the public, but equally find that balance. And it's going to be an incredible job. And of course, the number of agencies that we have, the military, the palace itself, the politicians, it's a huge combination. And communication is the first casualty of any large event. That has to be spot on. But I'm confident it will be.
Di Davis, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on GB News. Thank you. Well, Di there. Looking forward to the big day on Monday. It is one heck of a job the police and security services have got. And the hardest thing of all, you know, when the police are looking after a football game, they know what the capacity of the ground is. However, when it came to the Euro finals last year, vast numbers turned up who hadn't even got tickets. And what could they do? It led to terrible problems. And it's going to be very, very tough to estimate just how many people come to London in the next few days because they want to walk past that coffin. A lot more of your thoughts and views coming in. Peter says, Nigel, Her Majesty was an incredible individual and we all mourn her sad passing. However, the scenes of the general public shuffling past the vigil seems to be the best. Is the best, it seems to me. Yeah, I think Darren made that point. We've seen a lot of remarkable things over the last few days, but perhaps those images from St Giles' Cathedral thus far are the most powerful that we have seen. Yeah, it is very, very strong. Nigel, as a coincidence, I visited Newmarket on a pre-planned trip to watch the horses run on the heath at 6 o'clock this morning. Then went to place flowers on the Queen's statue on the edge of the racecourse. It seemed appropriate. It seems very strange to think she's no longer with us. May she rest in peace. Well, I think actually, do you know what? I've got to tell you, Jane, I think laying flowers at Newmarket was entirely appropriate for this Queen. I think she would thoroughly approve. And finally, Matthew says, I still have my silver Jubilee coin my nanny bought for me. My nan was so proud. My mum said And actually, I'm going to have to get used to living without a queen. And there is the original coin that Matthew was given. It was silver jubilee. Well, there we are. Well, thank you very much for all of those comments. So many of you keen to throw in your views, and so much passion too. Now, the Queen was a great Christian, unafraid of being a Christian. Her Christmas messages always mentioned Jesus. And we've heard more about the church and God in the course of the last week than we normally do. Defender of the faith and all of those debates and arguments that you'll have heard with me over the last few days. What we haven't talked very much about are church buildings other than the Abbey. Well, our studio guest is Eddie Tulacevich, if I've pronounced that.
That's quite right.
Oh, I've done all right there.
Yep,
good.
very good.
Good. Head of Communications for the National Churches Trust. So, as I say, we haven't talked much about church buildings, places of worship, places of history. You know, I know as I travel around this country, very often I'll stop and go in and look at a church because I want to see what's there and what its history is. But the Queen, of course, right from the moment of coronation, was involved with your organisation. I think Philip was involved as well. And I've got to tell you, in all sincerity, Eddie, I was unaware of all of this. So please, tell us the story of the royal couple and our places of worship.
Well, the year after the Queen was crowned, in 1953, the National Churches Trust was set up. We were then called the Historic Churches Preservation Trust, and all the great and the good were involved with our organisation. Winston Churchill was one of our trustees, the Governor of the Bank of England, and the Queen chose our charity to become the patron of. She inherited a number of patronages, but we were a new organisation, so for 69 years she was our patron. Wow. And that was a significant morale booster to churches up and down the country. As you said, there's a church in every village. There are several churches in every town. There are many churches in every city. They are the history of this country, back from the Saxons through to the Normans, through to the 20th century. People have been building churches. And the fact that the Queen and Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, took an active interest in our charity was a wonderful thing to happen to churches and to show their importance to people.
They're so important, and yet there hardly ever seems to be a church where there's not a sign outside about the fundraising target because the roof needs to be mended, or there's dry rot, or there's... I mean, it's a never-ending job to keep these churches effectively from falling into disrepair, isn't it?
It's a never-ending job, and as I said, there are 40,000 of them. The Church of England has got 16,000 alone. Most of those are listed buildings, so it costs a lot to repair them. So our job is to do things like fix the roof if it's leaking, if the spire's crumbling, we step in and try and do that, and also to pay for things like toilets and kitchens so that churches can be used for lots of purposes. And I think churches really sum up all the things that are great about Britain and also the things that the Queen took seriously. They are places of worship, or just a place to drop in for a moment's reflection, or as one of our vice presidents, Michael Palin, says, you just go there for a bit of peace and quiet. You can get away from the hurly-burly, and it doesn't cost you anything. Yeah. They're free to enter.
Well, you say that, but I mean, here we are sitting very close to Lambeth Palace, where the Archbishop of Canterbury presides, and yet to go into Canterbury Cathedral, or to go into Westminster Abbey. I think it's about 20 quid to go into Westminster Abbey.
It does, but the little parish churches, they're free.
No, I know.
So,
I was teasing a bit.
The only one you have to pay for is St Bartholomew the Great in London. That's the only one that charges an admission fee. So they're great as places of worship or moments of reflection, or the word today is, experience your spirituality, perhaps. They're also heritage, as I said, going back to the Saxons, the Normans.
Yes, and tell us about the yew trees. There's so many. It seems the older the church, the more likely there is to be a yew tree.
Yes.
Often one that's been hollowed out. What's the story here?
So the story there is that yews were worshipped back in pre-Christian era by pagans. They were normally on a slightly bit of raised ground, so they're slightly higher up. And then when Christianity came here, they were in a sense used to build a church around. So that's why why they're associated with churches. They were used sort of for pagan worship, and they're taken over by Christians, if I can put it that way.
And they They're very old, these trees.
Very old, very old. And I mean, you know, the monarchy, you know, the Saxon kings are buried in a church in Kingston upon Thames in London. Obviously, Westminster Abbey is where a lot of the monarchs are buried. But, you know, the history of this nation is told through its churches.
I
agree.
agree.
The third thing that's really important, I'm sure for the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, they're great centres for community. And that's, you know, used for civic occasions. This weekend, people have been going to churches, perhaps signing books of condolence, lighting a candle. I'm sure there will be services, you know, on the day of the funeral or the weekend before or the weekend after to mark that. But they're also used for all the sort of things that people need. I'm talking about things like food banks. You know, they're going to be used for you know, keeping people warm in the winter. So they bind the nation together in so many ways, and I think that's why they are important to the Queen.
Well, I mean, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, incredibly busy people, and obviously, you know, they gave their patronage to lots and lots of charities. Were they able to be actively involved?
Certainly, you know, for the first half of her reign, and the Queen and Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, came to our 50th anniversary about 15 years ago, and each year, you know, we had a communication with the palace saying she'd read our latest annual review. You know, she was very pleased to keep in touch, and just 5 years ago she wrote a foreword for a book that we'd written about churches, and she you know, she mentioned the special nature of our work. You know, it's a great morale booster to the public to know that the Queen's our patron, but also to the staff. And you know, there are little things that boost staff morale, because the staff got an invitation to a garden party once a year. So they felt connected to the Queen and to Prince Philip.
Well, I must say, I think it's very important. There are some churches, of course, that have fallen into disrepair, and whenever you see them, they make a very, very sad sight. Final quick thought. Wesley, Methodism, you know, and in many parts of the country, you'll find church and chapel. It seems almost, well, maybe I'm wrong here, but it seems very few of those chapels are now places of worship. They've all sort of all been turned into homes or Wetherspoons pubs, or, I mean, have they almost disappeared, the chapels?
A lot of them have gone. We're a charity that supports churches and chapels of all denominations all around the UK. So we're, you know, all Christian denominations we support. You're right, and that's partly because of the financial problems that smaller denominations like the Methodists have had. In Wales, in particular, independent chapels, they've been closing left, right and centre. Scotland, a lot of churches are going to close in the next few years. In England, closure has been, there have been fewer of them. And, you know, we hope, certainly as a charity, as the National Churches Trust, that money is forthcoming from the government. You know, the government has got a role to play in supporting those buildings. And so many people just who live near a church think it's worth saving. Chapels, you're right, they've been converted. They may also not have been as architecturally significant. They may only be 150 or 200 years old. They're important, but they're not Grade 1 heritage, which perhaps, you know, Norman...
They're not going back 1,000 years and more. No,
that's the difference there.
I completely understand. But when you see the sheer number of chapels around the country, you do realise that Wesley was an incredible phenomenon.
Well, indeed. But, I mean, you know, there are Baptist chapels, Methodist chapels, you know, there are so many different denominations. It's one of the strengths of this country, that there are so many different Christian denominations.
Well, do you know what? You know, it doesn't surprise me in the least that the Queen wanted this and believed in this, and thank you very, very much indeed for joining us, and thank you for the work that you do to preserve our history and our heritage. And talking of history, what a day today has been, hasn't it? Just truly remarkable to see the King walking in there into Parliament to address both houses, then to stand vigil at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh tonight. We are witnessing an extraordinary week, a week where history suddenly becomes real, where, as one of our messengers said earlier on, where suddenly we see what the constitutional monarchy actually is in action. It's real. It gives us a deeper and better understanding, actually, of who we are, what this country is, and what's unique about it. Now, coming up after me is Dan Wootton. Dan, what have you got on the show tonight?
Nigel, good evening. We are live from Buckingham Palace, and I have to say that moment that we shared with you earlier as Prince Charles, Princess Anne, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward gathered around the coffin was really spine-tingling, actually, and I loved the fact that you just allowed us that minute to have that moment, because it was really a beautiful moment. I'm going to be live, of course, over the next 2 hours. And we've got a big range of guests looking forward to tomorrow and also covering what have been these remarkable events today. Tom Bower will be with me live at Buckingham Palace to look into exactly what's going on with Harry, Meghan, William and Kate, and of course Prince Andrew, who was heckled. There was a moment, Nigel, where he was heckled on that procession today. We're also going to cross to the US, where we're joined by Samantha and Thomas Markle Jr., who want to pay their own tribute to Queen Elizabeth II on behalf of their father. And we're going to bring you the newspaper front pages the moment they drop. We'll have all of the breaking news and all of our regulars and superstar panel too. So we'll have a very big show live from Buckingham Palace between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. So please do stay with us tonight. Thank you, Nigel.
Yep, stay with Dan. He's got a very busy couple of hours. He was there at Buckingham Palace, broadcasting live. I'm back with you tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. We'll see what tomorrow brings. Of course, the body will be on its way to London tomorrow night. Now, we'll get the news.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel. I'm Dan Wootton, live from Buckingham Palace, which from tomorrow will become the centre of the nation's mourning for the late Queen Elizabeth II. In the last hour, a grief-stricken King Charles stood vigil over his mother's coffin as it lies in state at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. And in an official statement released today, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex issued his profound tribute with the words, "Granny, I am forever grateful to you." Coming up in my digest, I'll argue that it's now critical for Harry to rally around his father, the new king. Meanwhile, the eyes of the world were once again on Scotland. The late Queen's coffin carried from the palace of Holyrood House to St Giles Cathedral for a service of thanksgiving. As Her Majesty rests in her beloved Scotland tonight for the final time, I'll speak to GB News star Neil Oliver about the political significance of the last few days and why optimism for the Union has had a major lift. Don't miss that at 9:45. As well-known royalist Thomas Markle continues to recover from his stroke, his children, Samantha and Thomas Jr., have asked for the opportunity to share the family's grief. So the Markle family are going to pay tribute to the Queen live at 10:20. Plus, why is America's left-wing media disrespecting our monarchy at a time of national mourning? DailyMail.com star columnist Meghan McCain makes clear that those woke attacks are not the view of the patriotic American majority. She's live with me at 10:45. There'll also be expert analysis from our royal masterminds, Lady Colin Campbell and Phil Dampier, and I'm reunited with an esteemed panel of political commentators, Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, the journalist and broadcaster Sam Dowler, and the former MEP and campaigner Belinda de Lucy. But first, I'm joined live at Buckingham Palace by the acclaimed royal biographer Tom Bower. Tom, what incredible scenes we've seen over the past 2 hours. What did you make of that moment when the Queen was surrounded by her children in St Giles Cathedral?
Well, I think the whole day, and that particularly, was amazingly touching. I mean, I think Prince Charles, King Charles, has actually acquitted himself brilliantly today. I mean, he has really travelled to 7 different occasions, speeches, great speeches, deep interest in all the people he was meeting, clearly campaigning to be accepted as the King in Scotland, a critical place for him to succeed, but also in Parliament. I mean, he really captured the mood and captured the, I think, the obedience and the affection of politicians, which isn't easy.
Today's events have been good for the Union, haven't they, Tom?
They've been very good for the Union, they've been very good for Britain, they've been very good for the Constitution, they've been good for all the people of Britain who really believe in the country. And I think what's been really remarkable is that people of such diverse backgrounds are all pledging their loyalty to Britain. And there's no sign of any dissent at all. And that I find really encouraging. Not a murmur, really.
And I mean, those crowds in Scotland, lots of folks said, look, you're going to see the crowds in London, but perhaps we're going to have a more muted reaction in Scotland. They could not have been more wrong. The streets of Edinburgh, they were about 20 deep.
Eat your heart out, Nicola Sturgeon. Yes. I mean, she must have been really upset about that and having to sing God Save the King and all the other things which were stuck in her throat, no doubt.
Do you think the Queen would have had a wry smile, Tom?
I think the Queen had the last laugh on that.
Yeah,
so I
indeed.
think it's been a triumph in Scotland. I hope tomorrow in Ireland as well. Charles is, let's face it, an acknowledged campaigner. He's been for 50 years meeting and greeting, and he is genuinely very interested in people. My only caveat is I think he's a bit too interested. He seemed to be engaging in conversations which one always fears he might then say something which gets reported and is out of context. But today has been his day, the royal family's day, and Britain's day, because it is altogether a great accolade to our country that this wonderful woman, we all knew that we had a terrible moment when she went, that we somehow were getting over it because it's brilliantly organised, the choreography, the pageantry, everything is so perfect. A lot of people have put a lot of work in and they should be congratulated.
Tom Bout, the acclaimed royal biographer, live with me at Buckingham Palace. He is here with me all evening, and of course we are here until 11 p.m. with all the latest coverage as the King and country continues to mourn our late Queen Elizabeth II. But to round up what has been another emotional and incredible day, the news with Tamsin Roberts.
Dan, thank you. Good evening from the GB Newsroom. King Charles and his siblings have held a vigil at the Queen's coffin at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. The King was joined by the Princess Royal, the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex at the four sides of the coffin. Her Majesty will lie in rest at St Giles Cathedral for the next 24 hours before being flown to London ahead of the monarch lying in state at Westminster Hall. Earlier, the King visited the Scottish Parliament, where he and the Queen Consort received a motion of condolence. After 2 minutes' silence, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon reflected on the Queen's life and her close bond with Scotland. The King responded by promising to follow his mother's example.
My mother felt, as I do, the greatest admiration for the Scottish people, for their magnificent achievements and their indomitable spirit. And it was the greatest comfort for her to know, in turn, the true affection in which she was held. The knowledge of that deep and abiding bond must be to us a solace as we mourn the end of a life of incomparable service.
King Charles also led a procession today following his mother's coffin along the Royal Mile in Edinburgh. Joined by his siblings, they walked from Holyrood House to St Giles Cathedral, where a remembrance service has been held. During the service, Elder of the Church of Scotland, Morag Milne, thanked God for the Queen's long life.
With all our hearts, we thank you for the long life, the shining example, the steadfast commitment to duty, the strong faith, and the good humour of our wise and great Queen.
This morning in London, King Charles attended Westminster Hall, where both Houses of Parliament expressed their condolences.
Your Majesty, I welcome you and Her Majesty the Queen Consort to Parliament today on this solemn occasion.
In reply, the King said he was deeply grateful for their addresses and described Parliament as a living and breathing instrument of democracy. This is GB News. Back now to Dan Wootton at Buckingham Palace.
After lying at Holyrood House last night before her final journey to London, where at least 1 million people are expected to line the streets of the capital for her state funeral, today the Queen belonged once more to the people of Scotland. The spine-tingling procession to St Giles Cathedral, where the Queen's 4 children marched behind her coffin, provided the emotional crescendo on another historic day of Pope and pageantry amidst very real grief.
As Shakespeare says of the earlier Queen Elizabeth, she was a pattern to all princes living.
What a day it has been. But there was controversy too. Prince Andrew was heckled by a protester who ended up being silenced by an outraged member of the public.
Beginning of that long procession.
Disgusting! Wait, I've done nothing wrong.
Meanwhile, another unsavoury family row is developing behind the scenes over the family's wayward non-working royals, Andrew and Prince Harry, just like it did in the days before Prince Philip's funeral. Andrew had to face the heckler today without being dressed in military uniform like his siblings, King Charles, Prince Edward and Princess Anne. That's because a decision has been made for only working members of the royal family to be able to wear their military garb for the ceremonial events honouring the Queen. However, as a special mark of respect, it's been reported that Andrew, a Falklands War veteran of course, will be able to wear his uniform. By contrast, Harry and Meghan's odd little PR mouthpiece, Omid Scobie, tweeted that I understand that unlike Prince Andrew at final Vigil, Prince Harry will not be allowed to wear uniform at any ceremonial events. No doubt a huge blow for the Duke of Sussex, who served for 10 years and this morning spoke of the Queen being his commander-in-chief. So it's abundantly clear that despite Saturday's historic walkabout between the Prince and Princess of Wales and the Sussexes, significant tensions still remain between Harry and Meghan and the rest of their family. Tellingly, in Harry's statement paying tribute to the late Queen today, he said, "We now honour my father in his new role as King Charles III." By contrast, on Saturday, William pledged, "I will honour her memory by supporting my father, the King, in every way I can." The rest of Harry's statement, I really do think it's worth sharing with you in full. It reads, "In celebrating the life of my grandmother, Her Majesty the Queen, and in mourning her loss, we are all reminded of the guiding compass she was to so many in her commitment to service and duty. She was globally admired and respected. Her unwavering grace and dignity remained true throughout her life and now her everlasting legacy. Let us echo the words she spoke after the passing of her husband, Prince Philip, words which can bring comfort to all of us now. Life, of course, consists of final partings as well as first meetings. Granny, while this final parting brings us great sadness, I am forever grateful for all of our first meetings, from my earliest childhood memories with you, to meeting you for the first time as my Commander-in-Chief, to the first moment you met my darling wife and hugged your beloved grandchildren. I cherish these times shared with you and the many other moments in between. You are already sorely missed, not just by us, but by the world over. Thank you for your commitment to service. Thank you for your sound advice. Thank you for your infectious smile. We too smile, knowing that you and Grandpa are reunited now and both together in peace. Now, The Sun reported today that Harry and William could put their significant differences aside once more to walk side by side behind the Queen's coffin. During Prince Philip's funeral last year, they had to be separated by their cousin Peter Phillips. That would be one important sign that Harry could put his family and country ahead of toxic personal rows, which saw him reportedly dinner separately from Charles and William at Balmoral on the night the Queen died. But how much would it have meant to King Charles if Harry had today publicly pledged to support his reign? To respond now, I'm joined by my superstar panel, the Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, the journalist and broadcaster Sam Dowler, and the political commentator Belinda de Lucy. It's great to speak to you all. Carol Malone, look, it was a lovely statement from Prince Harry, but it's disappointing, isn't it, that he didn't pledge to support King Charles in the same way that Prince William did?
Would be making a statement because he's heir to the throne now, but I'm not sure why Harry felt the need to. And I have to say, and it's not really the time to be critical, but you know, I felt a certain resentment listening to that speech, and he was talking about. I have no doubt that he loved his grandmother, but he talked about, you know, supporting her and her being his compass. You know, that's not what we've seen in the past 2 years. You know, his actions and his words during the past 2 years do not reflect that speech. And I don't know why he made that statement, Dan. I was kind of reading stuff on social media today, and a lot of people think it's fabulous and it's wonderful. And as I say, I have no doubt that he adored his grandmother, but I do think it's hypocrisy to say, you know, that you know, he adored her and respected her and loved her, and yet he caused her so much pain in the last 2 years of her life. It would have been fantastic for the Queen, I think, if before her death she had seen William and Harry reconcile, even if, you know, for whatever reason, but she didn't, and Harry and Meghan were determined that that wouldn't happen. And I am sure there's lots of anger and frustration that exists still between the two men, but I'm almost as certain that that walkabout will have changed nothing, and it can't change anything. But I felt it's not anger, because I can't feel anger at the moment because our Queen is dead, but I do feel a bit resentful that he is saying these things, and yet his actions of the past 2 years have not been anything to do with what he said today. He disrespected his grandmother hugely by some of the things that he has done in the past 2 years.
Belinda de Lucy, do you agree?
Well, I certainly agree with Carol that, I mean, I'm not full of any sort of hate or anything towards Harry and Meghan at this time whatsoever. However, I do feel like Harry's mentioning that Queen Elizabeth is his moral compass did not sit well with me whatsoever. His constant offloading in attacks on the royal family are deeply unfair, because remember, the royal family cannot defend themselves. They can't retaliate to any of the accusations from Harry and Meghan, whether they're true or false. They have no way of getting back or defending themselves, and Harry knows that, and still he goes into the ring with his boxing gloves while the royal family are there with their hands tied behind their back, and I feel there's something deeply dishonourable about that. And I think his speech today was quite hypocritical, and it was like swallowing a bitter pill listening to it. But I don't feel any hate or anger today towards them whatsoever.
Sam Dowler, you feel like Prince Harry did show enough support to his father, King Charles?
I think ultimately there is no doubt, of course, that Harry has caused the Queen a certain amount of anguish in the last couple of years. But I think it would be disingenuous of him to say in a statement, like gush about his father, gush about King Charles, because obviously, stuff has happened in the past, and there's this book coming out in the future, and I think that he will take a beat, perhaps, and re-look at what's going on with his own book. I mean, for starters, it would have to be re-edited anyway to speak about Prince Charles as King Charles. But maybe he would temper some of the things that he has to say, some of the gripes he has, because at the end of the day, like, he's coming. If he's coming for his father, like, his father is now the king. It's almost treasonous to release a book slagging off the King of England. I mean, I don't think it would be as bad. I think it would.
Even
temper
you're struggling
what he
to
has
defend him now.
Do you truly believe he will temper this book?
Yeah, I do. I do.
don't believe it from
I do.
Nano's.
I think perhaps he maybe didn't think that the gushing, the amount of love everybody is showing now for King Charles, which we must and we should, because it will maintain our monarchy, which is our national identity. I think he would come across as
Carol,
very,
it's
very
not
foolish.
even just about tempering what he says, Carol.
Stop
he
the
has
book.
to pulp
Don't
this
do
book.
the book
The book
at all.
has to be withdrawn.
Completely withdrawn, but
not going to happen, though.
But the thing is, it won't be withdrawn because there's a lot of money riding on this, and he's never, that's why he's never going to come back into the royal fold, because if he does, he has to keep stum, and neither he nor Meghan are going to allow that to happen. If he really respected his grandmother, this book would be cancelled instantly. He talks about,
We don't know what's in it, though, do we?
He talks about respect for her, while, how much he respected her when she was alive. Well, no, he didn't respect her when she was alive. There was a point a year ago when he called her a bad mother on the Oprah Winfrey Show. How many times has he seen this beloved grandmother in the past 2 years? He was invited to go to Balmoral in August to see her. She invited him. Him and Meghan didn't go, and yet they can come to London for a charity event in September. Maybe had he gone in August, that would have given some comfort to the Queen. How well does she know her 2 grandchildren? She doesn't. She's barely seen them. To me, that's cruel. To me, that's the ultimate cruelty, to deny a grandmother access to her grandchildren, and yet she has seen those kids twice in person, maybe 3 times. Not enough. That doesn't show respect.
No, I agree with that, but I have to say that I think that there's no chance of the book not coming out now. I mean, they probably already spent the money, but I think that there might be re-edits, there might be maybe a change of tone, perhaps.
No, there won't.
It won't be a slating piece of the King of England. It won't be. Otherwise, he will never be allowed back in the country.
Sam, as long as victimhood is...
Final word to you, Belinda.
As long as victimhood is their currency, this is how they make their money. They have to stay relevant by selling stories on how much they're victims, because in America, the victimhood currency is huge. You can be billionaires off victimhood currency. And unfortunately, it doesn't bode well that while Prince Philip was in hospital, they still let the Oprah Winfrey interview go ahead. That was massively insulting to the Queen.
Exactly.
I think Harry, unfortunately, has displayed behaviour that is opposite to how the Queen would act. So I'm afraid Harry's not in my good books at the moment.
No, indeed. Very good point. And look, while I do absolutely understand that Prince Harry is grieving at the moment, he adored his grandmother, I will also point out that it was in the days before her death that couple, the Sussexes, were still briefing that even though they were on a visit to the UK, they didn't want to see any member of the royal family, not even the Queen. That was run literally days before her death. So obviously, I thought it was a beautiful statement today, but I don't think we can forget all of that. Thank you so much, my panel. Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, the journalist and broadcaster Sam Dowler, and the political commentator Belinda DeLucy. They will be with me all night as we continue our coverage of the remarkable life of Her late Majesty the Queen. And breaking tonight, King Charles III has stood vigil around Her late Majesty the Queen's coffin as it lies in state at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. He was joined by his three siblings, Princess Anne, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward. The sombre occasion is the third vigil for the princes, which began following King George VIII's death in 1936 and was repeated for the Queen Mother in 2002. Princess Anne is the first female royal to take part in the historic ceremony. The grief-stricken king and his siblings were solemn and mournful as they paid their respects to their late mother. Joining me now to reflect on what has been an incredibly moving couple of hours, our esteemed royal writers, Lady Colin Campbell and Phil Dampier. Lady C, wow, what a moment we've seen tonight. What did you make of it?
Well, I thought it was very moving, the Vigil, you know, and to have Princess Anne there as well. I thought it was absolutely wonderful. And it's in the finest tradition, started, ironically enough, by King Edward VIII with his brothers to honour his father, George V. And I thought it was beautiful. I also thought, may I say, that the service today at St Giles Cathedral and the whole of the proceedings were absolutely magnificent.
Phil Dampier, do you agree? Phil Dampier, do you agree?
Splash every sort of couple of hours, isn't there? And it was absolutely remarkable. What amazed me was the fact that as the royals stood around the coffin, members of the public were just walking past a few feet away. I didn't think that was going to happen. I assumed that they wouldn't be let in while it was going on. And to see them filing past just a few feet was one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen in 36 years of royal reporting. But the other thing that struck me today, to be honest, was the extraordinary stamina that Prince Charles is displaying. He must be absolutely exhausted. This is a guy who turns 74 in a couple of months' time. And yet he was at Westminster Hall this morning addressing Parliament, flew up to Scotland, met people at Holyrood, walked behind the coffin on the way down to St Giles, went back for another reception, met the First Minister, and then had the vigil. And it's absolutely remarkable the way that his schedule is going and the way he's doing it. So you've got to take your hat off to him. He's obviously decided to really go for it. He seems to want to meet as many people as possible, and I think it's working for him.
Lady C, it has been a pitch-perfect start to his reign, hasn't it? I mean, it was really interesting today, as Phil says, seeing how many folk he wanted to talk to in Scotland, how many ordinary people. He had a real desire to get up close and personal, which is exactly what we saw outside the gates of Buckingham Palace too.
Yes, sorry, Charles has always connected with all sorts of people, and he's always been a complete workaholic. He gets up early in the morning, he has breakfast, he works through, he never has lunch, he meets with Queen Camilla for tea if they're together, he goes back to work, he has dinner at 8:30 to 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock he leaves dinner wherever he is and goes and works until 12 or 1 o'clock, sometimes even 2 o'clock in the morning. You know, he has this constitution of an ox, but so did both his parents. I mean, to that extent, he's been very lucky. He's inherited very good genes from both his parents, both of whom were extremely hardworking as well. And it has to be said, both of whom were also extremely involved on a daily basis with as many people, ordinary people, as well as people of note, as they could possibly be.
Phil Dampier, of course, there was that uncomfortable moment during the procession where there was a heckler who interrupted proceedings. Specifically, he was, of course, referring to Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew also today wasn't able to wear military uniform. You're one of the journalists who knows Prince Andrew best. You've covered him for many years. How difficult would today have been for the disgraced Duke of York?
I think it would have been difficult, but he was doing his duty as a family member, you know, and he was with his siblings and very much part of the family. I'm sure that's how it's going to be in the next few days and indeed at the funeral. The fact that he won't be able to wear his military uniform except possibly at the vigil won't come as a great surprise to him. He's no longer a working royal. They've made that fairly clear that there's no way back for him at the moment, certainly in the immediate future. I don't know if there is long term or not, but certainly not in the immediate future. And so I don't think any of it comes as a surprise to him, but nobody can begrudge him as a son of the Queen from being at the heart and centre of all these events. But the fact that there was this heckler just goes to demonstrate the problems that his reputation now has, and he might get this sort of abuse quite often in public, and it just really sort of highlights. I mean, nobody really likes people heckling like that, but it does highlight the problem.
Lady C, did you think it was fair that Prince Andrew wasn't allowed to wear his military uniform?
Well, I vision that if he's not a working loyal, he can't, except possibly for the vigil. I don't think there's any need to change that. I personally think that Prince Andrew has been gloriously stitched up. I know people who know Prince Andrew extremely well, and I can tell you something, his tastes, as I have said before, don't run in the direction. And I think that the whole situation is most regrettable, and I think that he has been subjected to a grave injustice. And of course, their emotions run very high, because, the public has been fed a whole load of tosh about the situation, most of which does not stand up to scrutiny. Let us remember, his accuser at the moment is being sued in a New York court by one of her victims for having been a procuress who told her to lie about her age and say she was over the age of consent. All of this.
Into all of that tonight, but the point that you're making is that Prince Andrew should actually be able to play a full role, and he should be able to wear his military uniform, presumably because you believe he was a veteran and he hasn't been found guilty of anything. I presume that's what you're saying.
That is what I'm has charged no crime, found guilty of no crime. And, he has undoubtedly been a war hero. There's no two ways about it. And, he has been pilloried for something, but let's draw a veil over it. All I would say is I hope that people can restrain themselves, if not for him, for the Queen and King Charles III. Let's put it that way.
Phil Dampier, this is obviously a fascinating discussion, isn't it? Because I'm a free speech fundamentalist. I absolutely believe that if people want to make political points, they can do so. But this is a woman's funeral. It is not the time nor the place.
No, it's not the time and place. I mean, we don't live in North Korea, do we? We don't live in Russia. We do believe in free speech. But having said all that, I do find it staggering that during Mrs. Thatcher's funeral, for example, there were people protesting and leaping up and down. I just think it's disrespectful. If you've got nothing nice to say on a day of a funeral, don't say anything. I just don't understand it. But there was another protester who was arrested today in London, I think, or cast off and told that he was causing a breach of the peace because he was against the monarchy. Well, there's a time and a place to express your opinions, and maybe this isn't the right time. So, let's just have a bit of old-fashioned decency and old-fashioned manners on an occasion like this. There's plenty of time for people to make their point on other occasions.
Lady C, what are we expecting tomorrow? What are we expecting tomorrow, Lady C?
Oh, sorry. Well, I'm afraid you've thrown me. So ask me something else.
Phil, what do you think we should look forward to tomorrow, Phil?
His body's going to return to London Princess Anne and her husband are going to accompany it, flying out from Edinburgh down to RAF Northolt. In the morning, still people will be filing past. And then in the evening, the body's taken to Buckingham Palace, where she will spend one more night in Buckingham Palace, that place that she spent so much time, and indeed where she gave birth to her 3 sons. Actually, Princess Anne was born in Clarence House around the corner, but gave birth to her 3 sons there. So that will be a very poignant moment when she leaves Buckingham Palace for the last time the day after. But that's where she'll be tomorrow night. No members of the public will see her there, but the family will be able to be with her at Buckingham Palace.
And Lady C, the expectation that some 1 million folk might try and catch a glimpse of the Queen's coffin. It's going to be extraordinary, isn't it, here?
Well, I think it is, and I think she deserves it. She gave us 70 years of her life. She never missed a beat in the 70 years. She was an absolute example of what selfless devotion truly is, as well as decency, moderation, and all the civilizing virtues. I think she deserves it, and I think that there will be more people looking, really paying their respects to her, because that's really what it's all about. You know, they're not viewing the casket, they're actually paying their respects to her. And I understand that people are going to be very happy to stand up for hours just for the opportunity to walk past the catafalque and pay their respects to her for the few minutes that they do. And I think it's as it ought to be. Remember, she gave us 70 years. If a few of us want to give her a few minutes or a few hours, it's a very good bargain, wouldn't you say, to put it like that?
No, I couldn't agree more. It's going to be extraordinary in London for the next few days. Of course, people around the country and around the world gathering here. Thank you so much to our royal correspondents, Phil Dampier and Lady Colin Campbell. We will speak to you both tomorrow. It's now just a week until the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II, and thoughts are beginning to turn to what role, if any, will be played by the royal outcast Prince Andrew and Prince Harry. It's been decided by Buckingham Palace, as I mentioned, that due to their status as non-working royals, neither Andrew or Harry will wear military uniform to the late Queen's funeral. However, Andrew has been permitted to wear his Royal Navy dress for the final vigil at Westminster Hall. Meanwhile, there is concern over future ceremonial events after today's procession to St Giles Cathedral was marred by a protester targeting the Duke of York. Look.
Beginning of that long procession.
Disgusting! Wait, I've done nothing wrong.
So, Tom, that was an ugly incident, of course, with the heckler and Prince Andrew. Whatever you think of Prince Andrew, this is a man who is grieving his mother. He is humiliated because there he is in his suit when his brothers and sisters are in their military uniform, and of course he proudly served in the Falklands War. But how difficult is this going to be for the royal family to manage, given there are other public events coming?
Well, it's unfortunate, and it's not the only great problem they're facing. Obviously, Harry and Meghan is another.
Which we will come to in a moment.
But, of course, it is a huge embarrassment, and it's his last hurrah. I thought that when he stood outside Balmoral that first day after he started waving at the crowd, that was totally inappropriate. He still doesn't realise how shamed he is.
He thinks, doesn't he? Because we saw this after the death of Prince Philip too. He believes these are moments to rehabilitate his image with the public.
Exactly, and he's wrong. And clearly he hasn't got the message, but he's clearly not very intelligent, and that's rather a shame. But someone needs to tell him straight away now. He's just got to take a back seat.
So, Harry and Meghan, you mentioned them, of course. There seems to already be a row brewing today over whether Prince Harry should be allowed to wear his military garb if Prince Andrew is allowed for the Vigil. At this point, the royal family is saying no. This could get ugly, couldn't it?
I think it will get very ugly, and I think that in the end it's down to whether Harry and Meghan are prepared to apologise to Kate and William. My suspicion is, I'm convinced they won't apologise. Even worse, I'm told tonight that Harry's insisting that his book is published in November.
You're kidding.
Absolutely, it's absolutely astonishing. He's insisting. Apparently the publishers are not too certain, but he says that if they don't publish, he will breach a contract. That's what I'm told. And it's extraordinary because I think that's pretty, on the other hand, it fits the bill because Harry and Meghan's finances depend entirely on the book and on Netflix. And also, I think they're convinced they're in the right and they want to get their own back. And I think that part of the problem getting them to come out on that walk yesterday was very much because they can't decide whether they should appear or not. After all, they didn't plan to be here for a funeral. They thought they were coming for just a visit to promote themselves. They've been caught up in it.
And they didn't intend to see any.
And they didn't. And we've got to remember that Meghan refused to go to Balmoral ever since she was invited by the Queen in 2018. Refused to go up to see her while she was alive, but was desperate to go up there the day of the death. I mean, that is a disgrace of it all.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to get my head around this because we've been talking a lot about this book because my view, Tom, is that if Prince Harry has any sense of dignity or respect for his father and his grandfather's memory, he has to pulp this book. This book has to be cancelled. It can't be released. But you're saying not only does he want to press ahead with it, he wants to release it this year.
Absolutely, because that's when he's going to make the most money. I mean, everything in my view is based on finance, but I don't think there's any respect. I mean, that's the problem. He doesn't respect them. He's shown that. And Meghan even worse. I mean, I think her interview in The Cut 2 weeks ago, that American magazine, where she says she's got a lot more to say and she hasn't got any sentiment of forgiving. And Harry has lost his father. All those things just bubbling up, stirring and stirring and stirring for attention, for her own financial benefit, to make herself important. I think they're going to use this week. And it's going to get very ugly if someone doesn't take strict control over it very quickly.
And I guess, Tom, that was why William invited them for the walkabout outside Windsor Castle, because it's not that he has forgiven Harry. I mean, he hasn't. The row is deep.
The book is a time bomb. And what William is trying to do, as is the King, with that speech at the end where he says that we love Harry and Meghan, is to defuse the time bomb. But the time bomb is ticking, and I think Harry feels very committed to it, as does Meghan. And they now see it as their vehicle. This is their way to assert themselves. They have no sense anymore of what it's like to be part of the family in Britain. And that is the great tragedy. However hard King Charles and William try, I think they're going to find it very, very difficult. I was surprised by the march, the appearance outside Windsor. So was I. I thought it was very, very clever by William to try and do it. But, just that walk doesn't mean that the past can be forgotten. And
also their PR people continue to brief even during this period of grief, national period of mourning, because there's their odd little mouthpiece, that bloke Omid Scobie, tweeting today on behalf of Prince Harry over the military uniform. So even this period of mourning hasn't stopped the briefing and the counter-briefing.
Yeah, and that's they're sitting in Frogmore, plotting and fuming and getting amazingly angry. And I thought what was really relevant was that Harry wasn't on the plane up to Balmoral, didn't have dinner with the other members of the family, probably didn't even have breakfast and had to fly back commercial. What is interesting about that flight back was, I didn't see any protection officers, did you? No. I didn't see any worry about privacy. I mean, the whole phoniness, why we had to leave Megxit because of privacy and protection, all the rest of it, is all boo-ha.
So this is about money?
This is about money, about themselves, two very, very insignificant people who are out, in my view, to destroy the royal family for their own fame. And I think King Charles and William have a huge problem this week to try and contain it, and thereafter as well.
They do, but of course the start has been very positive for King Charles.
It's been terrific.
The thing is, Tom, you can't rewrite history, and so no matter what they now try and say, no matter how Harry and Meghan try and frame this, here are the facts. When Prince Philip was on his deathbed, they were throwing grenades to the royal family via an Oprah Winfrey interview. When the Queen was on her deathbeds, they were throwing grenades via an interview in The Cut and via their favoured journalists. History can never change that.
Absolutely, and that's why I'm convinced that this story out tonight that Harry wants his book out is probably true. That they don't see it, they don't see what's happening in London today as really part of their lives. I thought it was rather odd that Harry would issue his statement so late. Why did it come late? Clearly he was prompted that by some publicist it would be good to say something about his grandmother.
But it was interesting actually, I was told that it was because they didn't want to release the statement on the anniversary of 9/11, which was yesterday. Because they are an American-operated machine now, aren't they?
Yeah,
That's the reality. So maybe that did make some sense. Did you see the clip, Tom? We can't actually play it, but did you see the clip I've posted on my Twitter page where Meghan forgot that she was being filmed at the walk around outside Windsor Castle and actually snapped quite rudely at one of the royal courtiers? And I thought, given a lot of what you've written and what I've written over the years, that was one of those moments that had previously happened behind the scenes, emerging
You see the
in
real
public.
Meghan. You saw the real, absolutely. And what was rather interesting was the body language. She hung back when the four of them were standing together for a bit of the time, and Harry was clearly very, very nervous. It'll be interesting to see how they work now. My concern is only that the royal family survives, prospers, and is not damaged by them, because Britain, as we're seeing this week, is such an enhanced country because of the royal family, and as is New Zealand and Australia and the whole world. They represent just sheer service and good value and real values, and one way or another the Sussexes have to be neutralised before they can detonate their bomb.
Well, they have already caused damage, Tom, to the Caribbean. We saw that during Prince William's tour.
And
so the damage is real. This is not just a media storm.
He tried his hardest with the representatives of the realms yesterday, I think it was at Lancaster House or Buckingham Palace, to try and repair the damage. I think he'll find it very difficult. I mean, the problem is that he hasn't worked hard enough on the Commonwealth in the past, but now, because of what Meghan and the racism, she would have to apologise profusely and admit. But what's interesting is that Archie and Lilibet have not yet been in the Gazette appointed Prince and Princess. So I think that needs to happen to prove her wrong. I mean, she said so many things which are untrue in the Oprah Winfrey interview, the racism thing in particular.
But surely they're complete hypocrites if they accept an HRH title for their two children.
What's wrong with being a hypocrite from their point of view? That's exactly what they are all the time. I mean, hypocrisy for them is their paycheck.
Now, Prince Charles, now King Charles, has obviously had a perfect start to his reign. It couldn't have gone better from a PR point of view. I have been critical of him in the past. You have been critical of him in the past. However, this feels like he has a strong base now in which to try and secure the future of the monarchy.
Well, I wish that was true, and I wish him well. I hope it is true. But my feeling is, my book about him was called The Rebel Prince. The new edition we call The Rebel King, the making of the monarchy, of the monarch. The problem is, after 50 years of being a rebel and controversial, I don't think he can change. I think he'll try, but I think the real problem is he won't make speeches which stir controversy, but in private he can't resist giving his opinion. And unfortunately I fear that somehow those opinions will leak out, and that'll cause damage, because he does have very passionate opinions on a range of subjects. And however much his speechwriters and he have presented this way, I understand my constitutional position, it is after all been written over the previous years. So the test will come in about 2 or 3 months, when we've forgotten this terrible tragedy this week and he's back to normal. whether he can really control himself.
Well, we already know, for example, don't we, because of the briefing in June to the Times newspaper, that he is opposed to the government's Rwanda scheme.
Exactly.
Something that Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister, has said that she will be continuing with. So already you could see that being a potential tension at one of his early audiences with his new Prime Minister.
Exactly. And that is the problem. King Charles isn't going to be any different to Prince Charles. He has such passionate opinions, all these sorts of things, and he does have two particular traits. He wants to make his mark in history. He wants to be remembered as King Charles III. In 100 years' time, school children would say that was the great reign of Charles. The second thing is he does believe in the divine authority of kings. He does believe that he has a special understanding. There's an amazing quote he gave in 2004. I sometimes think that the whole world is on my shoulders and I've got to solve all the problems. He really does have this self-indulgence, and that, of course, is a danger. And I don't think that he's going to have anyone in his court which warns him to be quiet. That's my fear. I hope I'm wrong.
Do stand by. We're going to speak to you later, Tom Bower, live from Buckingham Palace. But let's get the latest now from Edinburgh, where our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, has been watching the momentous events there. Darren?
Yeah, good evening, Dan. As you say, momentous day here in the Scottish capital, and tonight thousands of people are pouring in and out of St Giles Cathedral behind me, paying their respects as they walk by Her Majesty's coffin, which will remain in that cathedral overnight, in fact until late afternoon tomorrow. The queue at the moment, Dan, is at least a mile long, with hundreds, thousands joining every hour. And we had that really powerful image earlier on tonight of the Queen's 4 children standing guard next to the coffin inside the cathedral. His Royal Highness, the King, we also had, His Majesty I should say, sorry, the King, we also had the Duke of York, the Earl of Wessex and the Princess Royal, Princess Anne, standing guard next to not just Her Majesty's coffin, but their mother. And you look at those images and you think how powerful that is, that tonight that they are standing or had stood guard next to that coffin. And I think for the people of Edinburgh today, it's been a really, really important moment for them. This has been their chance, the people of Scotland, to remember, but also to celebrate the life of Her Majesty the Queen. And that is why we saw the Royal Mile, where I am now, this medieval street, jam-packed with people, standing in silence as that hearse moved up this really, really important moment in British history. Tomorrow, though, the coffin will travel back with Princess Anne in a plane journey back to London, back to Westminster Hall, where she will lie in state, and the British public will get another chance to pay homage to the former monarch, to her former head of state, to Queen Elizabeth II.
Darren McCaffrey, our political editor, live in Edinburgh. Thank you, Darren, and incredible work today. I've been watching. And as Darren mentioned, all the eyes of the world were once again on Scotland today, as the late Her Majesty the Queen's coffin travelled from the Palace of Holyrood House along Edinburgh's Royal Mile before being carried into St Giles Cathedral for a service of thanksgiving. As part of the ceremony, Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon was asked to give a reading from the Old Testament.
For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up.
Many have noted the symbolic significance of the Queen's life ending in Scotland, and as we saw her coffin draped today in the Lion Rampant, the Royal Banner of Scotland, it was a welcome reminder of how the monarchy embodies the joint power of the Union. Nevertheless, as early as Queen Elizabeth II's death day, the BBC's North America editor Sarah Smith suggested that Her Majesty's passing could strengthen the cause for Scottish independence. Look.
It's without doubt that the Queen was part of the glue that held the nations of the United Kingdom together. But undoubtedly people who will be unsettled by the passing of the Queen will be wondering what kind of political impact it's going to have as we ask ourselves questions about what kind of United Kingdom we are now and whether in fact we should remain united.
Neil Oliver joins me now. And Neil, while the doomsters continue to report on breaking up our nation, is it not true that these past few days have actually underlined just how cherished Scotland is in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, hi, Dan. It's at the very least, I think it's just very interesting. The way in which the spontaneous response that we're definitely seeing in Scotland, I think it shows that there are four nations in the United Kingdom, but so many people, north, south, east, and west, evidently feel the same way as one another in the face of the Queen's death. That is just interesting. It underlines what I've always felt, that a majority of people all over the country are responding to what has happened in that spirit of something shared. The High Street in Edinburgh, the Royal Mile, it's 10 deep, or it was 10 deep earlier. You're seeing the queues. It's a visible symbol of something important, and symbols do matter. The response that you see in Scotland, it's not been planned, it's not choreographed or forced in any way. It's an instinctive reaction by people sharing a response to an event of national and also global significance. And you saw the reporter there suggesting that Her late Majesty was the only glue holding the Union together. And time will tell. But my own reaction is that I think there's much more besides. I think there's 300 years of shared history that come together as the glue. And others have said, and they're right, that it's not a time for politics, and that's quite correct. But I think what we're seeing in Scotland is it's not politics. It's people reacting in a human way, without any prompting, to the loss of someone to whom so many people feel and felt a connection, and whose death they want to mark. And I think that, in and of itself, is unifying. I think you're just. It's demonstrable that you're going to see that from the top of Scotland to the far south of England, and into the west in Northern Ireland and into the east. It's going to be marked in the same way. And I, as someone who's just interested in history and interested in the way in which and the whys and the wherefores of the ways in which people react to events, I find it fascinating that that people, as you're seeing now in Scotland, are reflecting something that shows a common bond.
Yeah, exactly. And Neil, we're obviously not really talking too much about politics this week, but it's been fascinating, hasn't it, to see the Scottish nationalists, Sturgeon in particular, Ian Blackford, have to deal with this.
Well, yes. I think symbols matter. I heard myself saying that last night when I was down in the Stuart in London, and I feel it very strongly just now. Symbols matter, and the Queen has died in Scotland, and her first procession through a part of the realm has been through Scotland, from Balmoral to Aberdeen, through some of the principal parts of Scotland, and then down to Edinburgh. And it does matter, because it absolutely, and no matter what impression the Scottish National Party might want, it underlines the fact that the monarchy, Her Majesty the Queen, the royal family have deep historical connections to Scotland. The wellspring, in many respects, of that monarchy, of that royal line, comes out of Scotland. that is undeniable. That is just historical fact. And the way in which events are unfolding, it just underlines and underscores that. And it will, without anyone necessarily wanting or wishing it to have happened, the sequence of events simply underlines the fact that Scotland and the realm of the United Kingdom and the monarchy and the royal family, they are woven together in a very complicated Gordian knot that reaches back hundreds and the better part of 1,000 years. It's powerful, potent stuff. And the way that these events have unfolded, just the way that they have unfolded, that will be reminding people of something that's deeper than politics, much deeper than politics, and that is history. That which people are being reminded of is history, and no matter what any political party or whatever, what some here today, gone tomorrow political movement might want to make of it, the deep ties of history matter, and we're seeing that play out. And forever after, people will remember, and it will matter deeply and profoundly to a lot of people north of the border, that Her Majesty's last journey was here. It began in Scotland, and that she will have spent that last night here in Scotland. That matters. People remember, and sometimes it's those symbolic moments, it's those transient moments that register and lodge themselves in people's memories, and they can affect future events.
Neil Oliver, only you could put it that way, but it was beautiful. And I hope Sarah Smith and the BBC were listening, because, as Neil points out, things are not so simple. Yes, the Queen's loss is a blow, but in fact, the events of the past few days may actually end up strengthening the Union. The brilliant Neil Oliver, I loved your coverage over the weekend. Thank you so much, Neil.
Thank you, Dan.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel. It's 10 p.m. I'm Dan Wootton, live from Buckingham Palace, which will become the centre of the nation's grief, with mourners expected to fill London and queue for 20 hours to see Her late Majesty the Queen's coffin and pay their respects. And tonight, a grief-stricken King Charles stood vigil over his mother's coffin as it lies in state at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. In a sign of Elizabeth the Great's far-reaching popularity, Holyrood House to St Giles Cathedral for a service of thanksgiving, and with even relentless nationalist Nicola Sturgeon obliged to play a key role, will today's historic scenes in Scotland actually strengthen the Union? My esteemed panel of political commentators return to give their view next. Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, journalist and broadcaster Sam Dowler, and former MEP and campaigner Belinda de Lucy. Then at 10:30, we're asking whether William and Harry are on a true path to reconciliation, as it's revealed their surprise Windsor walkabout could be followed by another poignant reunion, walking side by side behind their grandmother's coffin. As well known royalist Thomas Markle continues to recover from his stroke. His children, Samantha and Thomas Jr., have asked for the opportunity to share the family's grief. So the Markle family will pay tribute to Queen Elizabeth II live here at 10:20. Plus, StarDailyMail.com columnist Meghan McCain explains why the heartless left-wing media disrespecting Britain as it mourns its greatest ever monarch do not represent the views of truly patriotic Americans. She joins me live from Washington, D.C. at 10:45. So plenty more expert reaction and analysis still to come as we continue to pay tribute to our late Queen Elizabeth II. But first, I'm joined live at Buckingham Palace by acclaimed royal biographer Tom Bower. So Tom, so much has happened today, but obviously tomorrow is going to be another hugely historic day, because the Queen will return, or the late Queen Elizabeth II will return to London. What are you expecting?
Well, huge crowds, huge emotion, whatever's happening in Edinburgh even more. I think that there's going to be a feeling of finality, but on the other hand, a willingness to actually acclaim her amazing reign. I think there'll be pledges of loyalty to King Charles, who has performed brilliantly over the last few days. I think there'll be fears about what Harry and Meghan intend. There'll be hopes that somehow the royal courtiers will solve the problem of Andrew and not allow some ghastly spectacle when they have the vigil in Westminster Abbey. So there's a lot of uncertainty still, plus the certainty that it's going to be a very, very depressing, very mournful, very grief-stricken few days still.
So there's a lot at stake, and it's not going to be simple, but I think the one thing that the royal family don't have any need to worry about is the reaction from the public. I mean, there's talk, Tom, that London might actually end up being officially quote-unquote full for the last time.
Absolutely.
For the first time, sorry.
First time, yeah. No, and what's interesting is I've been looking at The Guardian, that paper that most people have forgotten, and they're really finding it hard
You poor thing.
to be critical. I mean, it's
Yes.
interesting.
Yeah.
They're finding it very, very hard to explain to their besotted readers. Even Jeremy Corbyn, after all, turned up for the Privy Council, parliamentary speech this morning. I mean, they're caught up in it as well, much of their chagrin. And they're constantly trying to say, well, it's not really Britain, what we're watching now, but it is Britain. That's the fantastic thing.
So it's not a given that this is going to be some sort of massive boost to the Republican movement?
Oh, I think on the contrary. What's always terrific is every time there's a royal event, either a sad one like this or the Jubilee, that it puts the Republicans in the minority. I mean, apparently only 14% support a republic. And I think even young people, I mean, so many young people on the streets coming out to mourn and to watch the spectacle and the rest of it. I think there's developing real roots. And Charles is very good for the young. I mean, he really has done a lot. The Prince's Trust has helped hundreds of thousands of young people. And William and Kate are the face of the modern monarchy. And they're gathering many, many supporters. They're doing a terrific job. So I have great hopes for the monarchy. And I think that's what the Queen's greatest legacy is. She has bequeathed a strong constitution, a strong monarchy, children and grandchildren who are working hard and accepted. And, you know, that's going to, when even the blessed Boris Johnson says she should be called Elizabeth the Great, I think he's got a point there.
I'm all for that. I'm all for that. Tom Bauer, it's been such a pleasure tonight. Thank you so much, Tom. We're here until 11, of course, with all the latest coverage as the nation continues to mourn our greatest ever monarch. But to wrap up the day's events, the news now at 10 with Tamsin Roberts.
Dan, thank you. Good evening from the GB newsroom. King Charles and his siblings have held a vigil at the Queen's coffin at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. The King, the Princess Royal, the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex stood at the four sides of their mother's coffin. Members of the public are filing past Her Majesty tonight to pay their respects. The Queen will lie in rest at St Giles Cathedral overnight before being flown to London tomorrow, where she will rest at Buckingham Palace. Earlier, the King visited the Scottish Parliament, where he and the Queen Consort received a motion of condolence. After 2 minutes' silence, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon reflected on the Queen's life and her close bond with Scotland. The King responded by promising to follow his mother's example.
My mother felt, as I do, the greatest admiration for the Scottish people, for their magnificent achievements and their indomitable spirit. And it was the greatest comfort for her to know, in turn, the true affection in which she was held. The knowledge of that deep and abiding bond must be to us a solace as we mourn the end of a life of incomparable service.
King Charles also led a procession earlier today following the Queen's coffin along the Royal Mile in Edinburgh. Joined by his siblings, they walked from Holyrood House to St Giles Cathedral, where a remembrance service was held. During the service, Elder of the Church of Scotland, Morag Milne, thanked God for the Queen's long life.
With all our hearts, we thank you for the long life, the shining example, the steadfast commitment to duty, the strong faith, and the good humour of our wise and great Queen.
And this morning in London, King Charles attended Westminster Hall, where both Houses of Parliament expressed their condolences.
Your Majesty, I welcome you and Her Majesty the Queen Consort to Parliament today on this solemn occasion.
In reply, the King said he was deeply grateful for their addresses and described Parliament as a living and breathing instrument of democracy. In his first statement since the Queen's death, the Duke of Sussex said he will honour his father, King Charles. In an emotional tribute to his grandmother, Prince Harry said, "You are sorely missed, not just by us, but by the world over." He reflected on his first meetings with the Queen, including the moment she met his wife and when she hugged her beloved great-grandchildren. This is GB News. Let's get back to Dan Wootton now at Buckingham Palace.
My superstar panel back with me in a moment, but first, let's take a first look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages. Now, the Daily Express leads with a touching image of King Charles III in front of the Queen's coffin, lost in grief for darling Mama. The photo was taken at the Vigil at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh earlier this evening. The Metro's front page simply reads The King's Vigil, with a sombre picture of King Charles in front of the coffin earlier tonight. The Independent shows the royal siblings united in grief as they attend that vigil for their mother. The paper leads, though, with Ukraine's troops winning back towns from Russia in the northeast of the country. The Eye reads Vigil for a Mother, with that historic photo of Charles at the vigil of the Princess and Princess Anne. The Times leads with another incredible wraparound front page, actually, in a quote from King Charles at Westminster Hall today. "As I stand before you, I cannot help but feel the weight of history which surrounds us." The Daily Telegraph leads with an image of Charles in the cathedral and the headline Guard of Honour. The paper writes that there were no tears and no wails, just the sound of footsteps, then arms clasped and heads bowed. The Guardian carries a photo of King Charles in Edinburgh earlier today, but alternatively its lead story is on the mounting pressure for Prime Minister Liz Truss to reveal the details of her energy plan as the country emerges from mourning. So it's interesting, Tom Bower earlier was talking about the Guardian, wasn't he, and the fact that so far they had been on board with coverage of the Queen's death. No longer, in the middle of a mourning period, they're already criticising Liz Truss. How predictable. The Daily Star leads with 30-hour queues expected in the UK as many flock to pay their respects to Her Majesty the Queen. The late Her Majesty the Queen. The paper also writes on Prince Harry's tribute to her granny and pays tribute to his... he of course paid tribute to her service and her smile. And silent vigil for a queen and a mother. That's the headline on the Daily Mail, with the King leading the nation in mourning. I'm joined now by my superstar panel. The Star Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, the journalist and broadcaster Sam Dowler, and the political commentator Belinda de Lucy. Now, as thousands of grieving Scots watched in near silence as the Queen's coffin made its historic journey up the Royal Mile in Edinburgh today, the Union has never felt stronger. It follows beautiful scenes yesterday where huge crowds lined the route of the cortege as it made its way across the devolved nation, most surprisingly in areas like Dundee, which has been a nationalist stronghold for 30 years. Now, even scheming Nicola Sturgeon has been forced to swallow her rabid nationalism momentarily and admit how important the late monarch was to Scots.
It's obvious then, and on every occasion she graced us with her presence, was the Queen's genuine love of Scotland. Indeed, her first official visit was here in Scotland when she opened the Aberdeen Sailors' Home in October 1944. In the decades since, the Queen has been intrinsic to the story of modern Scotland. Your Majesty, we stand ready to support you as you continue your own life of service and as you build on the extraordinary legacy of your beloved mother, our Queen.
Well, those scenes in Scotland are expected to be replicated on a monumental scale in London, which is predicted to become full as up to 1 million extra folk flock to see the Queen's coffin lying in state. Westminster Hall will be open 24 hours a day from 5 p.m. on Wednesday until 6:30 a.m. next Monday, the day of the funeral. And that's for people to pay their respects. But they may have to wait in a 3-mile-long queue for up to 30 hours. Carol Malone, what do you reckon? Are you going to do it?
Probably not. That's the truth of it.
Be honest.
No, I just said probably not, because I'm talking about the Queen and that's why I have no voice. But it's interesting. You're right. Neil Oliver got it spot on before. Her love of Scotland was entirely genuine. Nicola Sturgeon just said it now, and Charles made a point of talking about it in the Parliament today, and he just said, that she had the greatest admiration for Scotland, and she said that she had a deep and abiding bond with the Scottish people, and that is true. It's incredible that in mourning her death, we've become united as a nation again. It's palpable. You can feel it. It is incredible. And one writer, was Dominic Sambrook, the historian, said today. He said that our shared grief of the Queen has reminded us all of what we have in common. We love our country, we love our history, our tradition, our monarchy, and the monarchy is magical in that way. It has absolutely united us all, and it is interesting to hear Nicola Sturgeon talk. A lot of Scottish nationalists want a republic. That is a million miles away. That's just not going to happen. And that was a testament today by the tens of thousands that lined the route on her way from Balmoral to Edinburgh, and the genuine emotion that we've seen there. The Scottish people adore the Queen, and the feeling was entirely mutual. And although the fact she died at Balmoral was an absolute coincidence, it was incredibly fitting that she died in her beloved Scotland, I think. And I think that will strengthen the union even more in a bizarre kind of way. That's a part of history for them that will go on forever. That will never be forgotten. She loved being there. She let the Scottish people know time and again that she adored them and the country, and hopefully that will put an end to all this talk about separating us. I feel we're closer than ever.
Yeah, I agree, actually. Belinda de Lucy, do you? And by the way, are you going to brave the 24-hour queues, Belinda?
Yes, I definitely am. I've told my 4 teenagers they're to get up at 2 a.m. and we are going to make our way there in the unsociable hours. I think it might be a nice gesture for Londoners to actually choose more unsociable hours, so it lets the daytime be there for people travelling around the country who can only make day trips. But I want to go and do it more than once. I wrote to the Queen so often when I was a child, and waiting for those heavy envelopes to come through the post with a big ER on. I'm going to miss that, and I never got to see or meet the Queen. It's on a lot of people's lists of what to do before they die, meet the Queen, and many of us will never get that opportunity except when we pass her coffin and pay our respects. I just want to be able to walk past with my children and say thank you. Thank you. And I think as long as they make provisions for our elderly, our disabled, to not have to wait that long, then I think it's a fantastic idea. And actually, these headlines aren't very helpful because it's going to put so many people off telling the country it's going to be a 30-hour queue. Well, maybe it's not. I think they'll work out wonderful ways of getting people there to pay their respects.
Sam Dowler, I believe that you actually were one of these people who slept in the streets before the funeral of Princess Diana back in 1997. Are you going to do the same thing for the Queen?
Yes, I did.
Or the late Queen?
I was a sprightly 18 years old, and I mean, I loved Princess Diana. My family loved her very much as well. I remember my mother waking me up that morning in tears, and a friend of mine from work at the time, we decided to hot-foot it down to London, and we did sleep in the street. I wanted to experience it all. I wanted to see the field of flowers, and we woke up in the morning, and yes, and we watched the coffin come past, and our princes as well. So it was a very important moment, and I remember it, you know, to this day, obviously. So I do think I will go. I will go down there. I do agree with Belinda that there should be obviously, you know, for the elderly and for the disabled, that they should be able to go to the front, but for the rest of us, I think, you know, queuing up, take some snacks. I'm totally up for it. I think I want to, like, I have family that live down in Devon and Cornwall, and they want me to go. They want me to lay flowers on their behalf. They want me to speak on their behalf, and I would love to do that. I'm hoping somebody creates some sort of app where they will tell us when the hours are particularly low, and we can pop down there. I think it's something that we'll never forget. I think it's this is a powerful moment, and I have to agree with Carol as well that, you know, this, I think everyone is surprised by the outspilling of love in Scotland. I think catharsis brings change. I think Nicola Sturgeon would be a fool to bang her drum about independence anytime soon. But yes, I'll be there down in the queue at some point. Just don't look for me.
Well, I guess it's one of those great equalisers, isn't it? Because unless you're an MP, maybe a member of the House of Lords, I don't think there's any queue jump, Sam. No matter who you are, no matter how much money you have, no matter how famous you are, you line up for the 24 hours, and that is a beautiful equalising moment, I think. Sam Dowler, Carol Malone, Belinda DeLucy do stand by, but look, the mouthpiece of Meghan Markle, that odd little bloke, Omid Scobie, has been popping up all over the place this week, trying to cash in on the royal family, which he loves to disrespect in the name of the Duchess of Woke. But does he actually have any idea what he's talking about? Watch this from the American channel ABC.
Will end up laying at rest at the smallest palace in Edinburgh before it makes its journey on one of the royal trains over to the UK.
So did you catch his slip-ups? If not, have another look.
Before it makes its journey on one of the royal trains over to the UK, over to the UK, over to the UK.
Over to the UK? He's been listening to Nicola Sturgeon too much, hasn't he? And it's not just US TV making mistakes. Jane Secker from Sly News was caught stoking the idea of revolution and encouraging for it seemingly to overthrow the monarchy. I'm not joking, listen.
As Lord Bottomley were talking to him, was referring to this and saying how, you know, some people will say, well, you know, how come we've got a royal family? It's not very democratic. The fact of the matter is, it is democratic, you know, until we have a revolution. It's democratic in the sense that the British public is laissez-faire about changing it.
Well, Jane, I'd say you're wrong. The British people are not laissez-faire about the monarchy. We are, on the whole, proud and actually not afraid to say so. And actually, that's one of the reasons why it's been so lovely hearing from you all week since we've been here with you on Thursday night. More of your feedback now. Ruth, via the email, says, I think Harry and Meghan will have been shocked to the core that despite their best efforts, King Charles and Queen Camilla have been so very warmly welcomed by the British public. Absolutely. Very good point. Very good point from Digby on Twitter. I was born in 77, and growing up, people would say that was a Jubilee year. I have a coin, a tea towel and other bits that my family bought me, but never really thought about what they meant until I grow up. It is hard to swallow that there may never be another monarch like her. Very good point. And please do send me your thoughts and feelings on this sad occasion, both on email to dan@gbnews.uk and via our GB News Twitter account. I've been loving talking to you these past few days. It's really helped me, so thank you so much. Now, despite the Markle family's ongoing disagreement with the Sussexes, their love for our late Queen is overpowering. Meghan's father, Thomas, is a well-known royalist, but as he's recovering from a stroke which has cruelly stolen him of his speech, it's his children who are speaking on his behalf at this deeply emotional time. Samantha and Thomas Markle Jr., who is currently looking after his father, have asked for the opportunity to express their family's grief and address the British public directly. So I'm delighted to say that they join me now from Florida in Sam's case and from Rosarito, Mexico in the case of Thomas Markle Jr. Thomas, tell me, how did you learn of the news of the death of Queen Elizabeth II, and how did you inform your father of the news?
Oh, hello. Thursday morning, I was going through my YouTube, answering comments, and they started pouring in, and that's how I was informed, sadly. And then text started rolling in. So it was a very shocking morning because it just didn't feel right anyway. Something was off. And then immediately I picked up the phone and called Dad, and he had already been informed as well. It was a very sad morning.
How did your dad react, Thomas?
Dad was and still is upset and sad about it, as we all are. We feel as though we have, some sort of a connection to the late Queen and the British people, and on behalf of him and myself, our deepest condolences go out to the late Queen and the entire everybody in the UK.
Samantha, it's so nice to speak to you. Unfortunately, not in great circumstances tonight. I'm very sad for Thomas because I know that it was one of his lifelong ambitions to meet the Queen one day. He hoped that would still happen, didn't he?
Yes, he did. And we spoke today, and he was very clear about wishing to extend his reverence, his condolences, and just his heartfelt sorrow for the British royal family and the British people, as we all are. I think it's been a heavy-hearted day for all of us. Here in Florida, we have many, many Britons, and we have, Floridians in general who are royalists, who were raised, who grew up like the rest of the world, adoring Her Royal Majesty, and she's become a part of American fiber as well, everyone's mother, everyone's grandmother. And so I think it's just been very sad for us across the pond as well. So I'm honored to extend my condolences to the British royal family and to you, the British people, for this tragic loss. It's very sad.
Thomas, have you and your father been watching any of the coverage from the UK, and do you intend to watch the funeral next Monday?
Yes, absolutely. I've been catching quite a bit of it on television, and it's just an incredible journey, and it's amazing the respect, and it's just incredible just watching the entire crowds give their respects. So I definitely plan on watching the services as well. Just such a remarkable person. I mean, she was the world's queen, the entire world. I don't think there's a more remarkable, amazing woman on the planet.
Samantha, of course, your sister, Meghan, coincidentally, was in the UK when the Queen died. She has made this public walkabout with the new Prince and Princess of Wales. William and Kate, but Thomas Bauer, who I know that you both know and your father knows as well, he was on the show earlier, and he said that Prince Harry does intend to press ahead with the release of his autobiography in November, despite the death of the Queen. Do you think that's appropriate, Sam?
Well, that being said, if those are the plans moving forward, we can only hope that there are favorable and not salacious morsels of information in the book, that it would be a tribute of sorts and honor her memory more than anything. So, you know, we wait, and we can only wonder until then. But very sad. I think that that's still coming out. You know, unless it's good.
I think that's an understatement, Samantha, absolutely, because it's very unlikely to be good from what we hear. Thomas, what did you make of the reunion between Harry and Meghan and Kate and William?
I didn't really give it that much thought because it's not, you know, I don't think, I think it was just irrelevant as far as I was concerned. I don't think it should. And I think it was more of I don't know. It just didn't seem fitting that would be brought into the light during all of this. I didn't think it was relevant, but it could have been done a different way, I believe. But you know, also, you know, I mean, it is family, and family does have to come together in times like this.
Yeah, indeed. And Thomas, how did the news of the Queen's death go down in Mexico?
There was a few local articles in the papers. Other than that, I've just been, you know, we've just been staying close to home and just being low key. Other than what's on the news, but there was a few local articles about it. Not that I can.
Samantha, given that Meghan has now reunited with the Windsor side of the family, of course coming back together with William and Kate, despite all of the acrimony, do you hold out some hope that this might be a bit of a life-changing event for her, one of those moments that makes her think, oh my goodness, I've got to see and speak to my father before he dies?
Well, I would hope that that the events that occurred with my father himself would have been causal in that epiphany. And so, you know, I'm not keeping my fingers crossed or holding my breath on the grounds that so much has transpired that's been serious. But with regards to this event and the memorial and the passing of Her Majesty, you know, I just have to say a little bit off topic. There was so much play in the media about the reunion of the Fab Four as the focus, which felt really inappropriate on the grounds that, firstly, my brother, you know, and the world are right. It should be about Her Royal Majesty and remembrance of her. But also, I think there's been so much water under the bridge. I don't think at issue is whether or not everyone should just let bygones be bygones and hope for the Fab Four and want the fairy tale solidified again. I think the burden, the onus really is on those who have caused the pain and those who have engaged in mudslinging to make amends and to be the ones to be accountable, apologize, and extend the olive branch. You know, I think that can't go to the wayside. So I'm hopeful for that, but that's, you know, not up to any of us. And we can only wonder whether or not, you know, that's going to happen. This has been tragic, and sometimes it takes a tragedy to open the eyes of some. And by God, whatever it takes, as long as it happens, you know, that life is short. So if it happens, then, you know, then we're all better, we're all blessed, and perhaps we've all learn something then from Her Royal Majesty.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There are so many things we can learn from the Queen. Sam, I just wanted to talk to you because I know you're in Florida. A lot of the sort of liberal left-wing American media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, has been very disrespectful over the past few days of Britain, of our monarchy, of the Queen, of William and Kate as well, the new Prince and Princess of Wales. And one CNN report, they were simply dismissed as, oh, those other royals, because they were so focused on Harry and Meghan. I spoke to Rudy Giuliani on the show last night, though, and he said that very small elite section of the American media does not represent the wider feelings of the American public, who are actually very affectionate towards the Queen, very pro the monarchy. Do you agree with that sentiment, Sam?
I do, and I agree with that on the grounds that the radical left has spun a narrative that is very emotional and fragmented without looking at full facts on the table, such as, the charitable contributions and activities of the British royal family, particularly Her Royal Majesty, going back to, being integral and involved in more than 600 charities worldwide, beginning in 1949, and to the tune of billions of dollars. And so when some of these lefties speak about racism or disconnectedness, they are really not looking at the facts, at the big picture. And I think, before they engage in emotional mudslinging, they should really look into what she was all about as an icon, as a contributor to this world that we live in and to the betterment of it. The world is a bit more dismal without her unless we adhere to some of the values that she left us with. And I think the left would be wise to, apply some of those values in their lives. It only can bring good. Yeah.
Point. Thomas, finally to you. Obviously, we're following very closely the progress of your dad. How is he doing? We're still determined, of course, that he'll make that visit one day to London.
Yeah, I did the other day, actually. Dad plans on definitely making the trip. He's doing very well, making more progress all the time, which is great. So we definitely do want to make that trip and get over, and definitely looking forward to it. We also wanted to say deepest love and sympathy to Charles, and compassion for Charles and the entire royal family as well.
Absolutely. Well, look, really beautiful stuff. Thank you so much to Samantha and Thomas Markle Jr. paying tribute to Queen Elizabeth II. So we're live at Buckingham Palace tonight. I want to bring in now our London reporter Alice Porter, who has been monitoring the growing crowds of mourners around the country and especially here at the epicentre, Buckingham Palace. Alice, of course, tomorrow is going to be the big day, isn't it, or one of many to come in the capital?
Absolutely. I mean, these crowds that we've been seeing here are just going to be growing and growing. I mean, a couple of hours ago, I went and had a look at some of the floral tributes, and I have to say, this sea of flowers is just absolutely stunning. And I think what's so charming is seeing all these children who've got involved. There was one child who left a little hobby horse, which I just thought was a lovely ode to the Queen. So yeah, lots going on here. Crowds still arriving, but my goodness me, those are going to increase even further tomorrow because the Queen's coffin is being flown from Edinburgh to RAF Northolt, and it will be making its way here, where it will be met by King Charles, who's having an incredibly busy day tomorrow. He's going from Edinburgh to Belfast, having a number of visits there, and then he's going to be coming here to meet the coffin, where it will stay for the night at Buckingham Palace before an enormous sort of cortege will be going through to Westminster Hall on Wednesday. And I think we're going to see a change in tone, you know, like what we've seen with the flowers, the tributes. I was at Windsor Castle yesterday. It was very jovial. I think families kind of coming together. But I think we're going to see on Wednesday a real change in tone, where for for people in England, there's suddenly their Queen is coming back, and the Queen is going to be in a coffin. And I think that is going to be very significant and a real change in tone for the British public.
And Alice, is London prepared for this? I mean, is it going to be able to cope with this influx of crowds? Discussion that the queues may actually stretch for 24 hours.
Well, I have to say, I was quite surprised. People are already queuing on Lambeth Bridge right now. I mean, that's 48 hours ahead of when we're expecting the coffin to be moving there. So it's really quite extraordinary. I mean, I thought it was just quite a sweet sort of anecdote that actually one of the people who's camped out at the moment is a former butler of the Queen, which I think really just shows the kind of how wide-ranging the support is for the royal family, for the monarchy, and I think that's been such a striking aspect that we've noticed with all the tributes that have been made. This is something that pulls people together of all ages and generations. But my goodness me, will it be a challenge for the capital? Absolutely. All the hotel chains are saying that they're going to be fully booked. There's warnings about the trains and people taking the transport. But I think in some ways, look, this is history. How often does something like this happen? Yes, London gets packed out. We saw this with the Olympics, but this is going to be something even more extraordinary for people in Britain. So I think, yes, we're going to see increased security. Yes, we're going to see queues on the streets going back. But I'm like, when have we seen something like this? People queuing to see a coffin. I mean, it is something from the history textbooks, and we're here witnessing it. It's wonderful.
Indeed. Alice Porter, our London reporter. I'm sure it's going to be a very busy day for you tomorrow. Alice, thank you so much. But let's take a look now at tomorrow's newspaper front pages, and The Sun leads with a sombre Prince King Charles at the Vigil in Scotland. Elsewhere, the paper covers Prince Harry not being able to wear military uniform at the Queen's funeral. The Daily Express leads with a touching image of King Charles III in front of the Queen's coffin, lost in grief for darling Mama. The photo was taken at that vigil at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh earlier this evening. The Metro's front page simply reads The King's Vigil, with a sombre picture of King Charles in front of the coffin earlier tonight. The Independent shows the royal siblings united in grief as they attend that vigil for their mother. The paper also leads with Ukraine's troops winning back towns from Russia in the northeast of the country, which is of course the other really big international story at the moment. The Eye headline, Vigil for a Mother, with that historic photo of Charles. The Times has a wraparound front page again with a quote from King Charles III from Westminster Hall today. As I stand before you, I cannot help but feel the weight of history which surrounds us. And the Daily Telegraph also leads with an image of Charles in the cathedral and the headline, Guard of Honour. The paper writes, there were no tears and no wails, just the sound of footsteps, then arms clasped and heads bowed. The Guardian carries a photo of King Charles in Edinburgh earlier today, but it's decided to break the national mourning period and run with a lead story about the mounting pressure for Prime Minister Liz Truss to reveal the details of her energy plan as the country emerges from mourning. Let me just say, if Liz Truss was speaking about the energy plan at the moment, can you imagine the criticism she would receive? The Daily Star leads with 30-hour queues expected in the UK as many flock to pay their respects to Her Majesty the Queen. The paper also writes on Prince Harry's tribute to his granny and her service and smile. And the Daily Mail has a headline, Silent Vigil for a Queen and a Mother. Now, my superstar panel back with me, the Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, the journalist and broadcaster Sam Dowler, and the political commentator Belinda DeLucy. The sight of William and Harry reunited alongside their wives during Saturday's surprise walkabout in Windsor was a heartening throwback to the affectionate and supportive times of old. The two brothers, whose once inseparable bond had been forged by the tragic loss of their mother, were again united by grief as they mourned their grandmother. And there could be a second, even more poignant reunion at her Majesty the Queen's funeral next Monday, with organisers reportedly hoping for William and Harry to walk side by side behind her coffin. Now, you'll remember their cousin Peter Phillips actually separated them during Prince Philip's funeral procession in April last year during the height of their feud. But was the reunion on the long walk the beginning of a path to reconciliation, or just a royal truce as the family put on a united front during this time of national mourning. Well, the Daily Mail's editor-at-large, Richard Kay, is reluctant to see it as anything but a temporary period of peace. He believes a lot depends on how the Sussexes behave in the coming days. And Richard writes, perhaps we should see Saturday's exercise among the mourners at the gates to Windsor Castle as a first step, and that both William and Harry will be able to reflect that they and the royal family are better and stronger together than they are apart. At the moment, the closest analogy to the events of the past few days is that of soldiers on the Western Front during the First World War, when they held their own ceasefire with the enemy on Christmas Day in order to play football. Those soldiers famously returned to their trenches and carried on hostilities. So is this a real step towards William and Harry resolving their feud, or are they just temporarily putting their differences aside out of respect to their grandmother, Carol Malone?
I don't think this is in any way, shape or form the first step to reconciliation. I mean, how can they ever be reconciled when trashing and disrespecting the royal family is now Harry and Meghan's business? It's how they earn a living. How could they possibly be invited back into the royal fold? How could they possibly come into the royal fold when they can't be trusted not to keep the secrets they will hear behind the royal walls, when they can't be trusted not to blab? You know, last year Harry had tea with the Queen for literally an hour, and within minutes of him coming out of that tea, he started to talk about it to an American TV network. You know, how can they ever have a reconciliation? They're never going to be reconciled as long as they make their living in this way. And I'm pretty sure that Harry will walk behind the Queen's coffin at the funeral with William. But that doesn't mean by any stretch of the imagination this is a reconciliation. You know, you can see they're very uncomfortable in each other's company. I was looking at them when they were doing that walkabout. Not once did Kate look at Meghan. And there was a time when Meghan looked across at her. Kate just wasn't having it. I think there's a lot of anger on her side, quite rightly, because Kate was very badly trashed. And William is angry with his brother because he trashed not only the family, called them racist, he trashed his wife. So I just don't see how they can have a reconciliation while Harry and Meghan are living in America, while they have contracts with multi-million-pound companies to trash the royal family. It's never going to happen. Tom Bower had it right. He said, you know, here we have two very insignificant people trying to ruin the royal family. And I fear, you know, and the other thing that Tom Bower revealed tonight was that Harry is, despite everything that's happened, despite all that talk today about his respect for the Queen, despite all of that, it is him who was pressing ahead with the publication of this book in November. I mean, it's shocking and it's shameful, and he should be ashamed of himself, actually.
Sam Dowler?
Well, I mean, so many of us have siblings, and so many of us have had arguments with our siblings. And I truly believe that it was quite possible on her deathbed that the Queen might have said that one of her dying wishes was that they'd be reconciled. And within 24 hours, they were out in public with a sign of togetherness. And
this is nonsense. This has nothing to do with the Queen. Yeah. The Queen didn't say that. They got together because I don't care if you're speaking. William sent a text to him to ask him to go.
We don't know any of that.
Well, yes, we do.
No, we don't know any of that.
It's been in the papers today. Read the papers.
Yeah, but it's not set in stone, and we also don't know what. And what you might agree with what Tom Bower says. We don't know if that's true either. At the end of the day, it would be nice. And we are a nation of forgiveness, and to forgive one's siblings, to forgive people who have done wrong is a good feeling. Not to hold these grudges forever, because it's very bad for our mental health, etc. So I think maybe if we hope that this could be the beginning of something. And as I said earlier on in the programme, there could be a tempering of the book, there could be a cancellation of the book. We do not know, but I think. You seem
to know better than Tom Bower, who's written a biography on it. But anyway,
I'm not saying that at all.
Well,
I'm just hoping that in light of the Queen's death, there might be some sort of light at the end of the tunnel.
Belinda de Lucy?
Well, I think it's very British to be polite to those you don't like. I mean, often you'll see, you know, our reserved way of dealing with people that we're not too fond of. But Prince William is the epitome of manners and class with his invitation to Harry. I absolutely think he did it for his grandmother and not for Harry. And I think that was the right thing to do, to be unified in the eyes of the world in grieving for their grandmother. I think that is the right thing to do. However, I don't think there will be any reconciliation. As Carol mentioned, you know, Harry and Meghan sat there and they did accuse Kate in public in front of millions of viewers of making Meghan cry, inciting a wave of hate towards Prince William's wife, Princess Kate. And I don't see why Harry seems to have the right to defend his wife, but William can't defend his. And he should stand with Kate together for the United Kingdom, and Prince Harry and Meghan can stand for themselves back in the USA.
You know, the cynic in me
thank you so much,
says...
Belinda Lucy. Final word, Carol Malone.
I was just going to say, the cynic in me says, you know, what has happened, the Queen's death and what's going to happen afterwards. I think, you know, for Harry and Meghan, this will be a continuation of all their contracts with those companies like Spotify and with Netflix, because there's a lot more for them to say now. And I think that the idea that they will be reconciled, I don't think they care about their family anymore. I think they've made that perfectly clear.
We can hope, though, can't we?
Yeah, I'm an optimist, a bit with Sam. Let's hope.
I'm so not.
Let's hope they apologise. Harry and Meghan, that is.
They won't, not in a million years.
Carol
They
Malone,
don't think they've got anything to
Sam
apologise
Dowler,
for.
Belinda Lucy. Thank you so much, all. Stand by. Now, as we have seen over the past few days, thousands of Scots have lined the streets to pay their respects to the late Her Majesty the Queen. However, unfortunately, not all of them mourned the loss of our greatest sovereign. Did you hear this woman? Jackie Pickett. So she runs Jackie's Fish and Chip Shop in Muir of Ord in the Highlands. I'm certainly not going to be going there, let me tell you, because she posted a video of herself on the shop's Facebook page. For obvious reasons, it didn't go down well. Look.
Woohoo! Fantastic! Would you do that again? Will it work? And I'll just record it.
London Bridge has fallen! Next step, ladies and gents, next step.
Now, that is the nasty side of Scottish nationalism right there. Not unsurprisingly, she received a huge amount of backlash as a crowd of 150 enraged residents descended on the shop to hurl eggs and also, and I don't approve of this, smash windows. Despite all hard-left liberals trying to paint the Queen as some sort of colonising relic of the British Empire, by the way, when you speak to people on the ground, it's usually actually totally different, including this Aboriginal elder who broke down in Australia. I really wanted to show you this because I thought it was a beautiful moment where he recalled the late Queen's kindness.
It's a funny thing to feel a bit emotional about it because she's so welcoming. And she thanked us for coming. And I think for the first, excuse me, I think for the first time in our lives we were treated properly as she's treated us as human beings.
What a moving story. So do not let anyone tell you that our late Queen Elizabeth the Great was a callous, imperialist, racist. In fact, she did more to foster race relations across the globe and supported minorities throughout her realms. Thank you so much to my superstar panel tonight, Carol Malone, Sam Dowler and Belinda Lucy. See you soon. Now, as we discussed earlier in the show, much of the left-wing media coverage from the US hasn't been particularly respectful this week. Look.
See Harry get out first, then you saw Meghan, and then the other two royals as well.
Andrew, are you really denying what I just said about British colonialism? Are you really doing that, Andrew? Are you really doing that?
Andrew, slavery.
Andrew, this is not a propaganda show. Andrew, I need you to stop. I need you to stop for a second. I need you to stop for a second. Are you really taking issue with the horrors of colonialism, Andrew?
I'm certainly taking issue with your remarks about slavery, which we abolished 32 years before you did, and we didn't have to kill 600,000 people in a civil war over it.
The wealth of this empire was derived on the back of the people of their empire.
On display in the palace.
Right, on display everywhere, and in the crown and everywhere. So what we're saying is that there are this answered who want to see their monarch finally talk about what it means and what, you know, potentially the idea of reparations, definitely justice, right? Justice.
But my next guest, Meghan McCain, daughter of the late and much-loved Republican presidential candidate John McCain, and also star DailyMail.com columnist, says the American people had enormous love and respect for our late Queen. In a brilliant column, she has written, what makes her past seem so forceful to Americans is the real connection she made between our nations. She nurtured and maintained our special relationship because she knew instinctively that despite our history of conflict, the United States has no more trusted ally than the United Kingdom. And it's an absolute pleasure to say Meghan joins me now live from Washington, D.C. Meghan, I was so glad that I read your column because everything that we're seeing, right, from MSNBC and CNN and the Washington Post and the New York Times seems to want to paint the Queen as some sort of representation of all of the wrongs of the British Empire.
Yeah, I mean, it's absurd, and I think it's very reductive commentary, especially during this time of grief before she has been buried. The Queen is a beloved figure. Americans, average Americans, I don't think completely comprehend the monarchy, but there is an understanding of Queen Elizabeth's vital role in the United States, her vital role keeping freedom and liberty alive in the West. The UK is America's greatest ally. We have fought together in wars. My brother Jimmy fought alongside British soldiers in Afghanistan. It is a long, long history. The Queen Elizabeth met with 14 sitting presidents, including a story I was reminded of, my personal favorite now, meeting with President Ronald Reagan, horseback riding and eating tacos and enchiladas with him, and really fostering a personal relationship. I think she understood the value between our two countries. And I have been very surprised at the deep outpouring of grief and sadness at the Queen's passing. My own mother-in-law came over to my house right after it happened and was almost despondent over it. And I think she's just a figure of steadiness in a chaotic world, of, a person who really has kept calm and peace. And during these times of extremism and unrest, she was a figure we could all look to and a figure of stability that the United States could count on. So people may want to have what I find reductive and disgusting conversations about things that happened well before she became queen. But I think that the tone, at least in my country, from average Americans is one of deep respect and grief for your country right now. This is truly the ending of an era globally. And I think as someone who I consider myself a feminist, she is arguably no greater feminist icon, a woman who was a global leader for over 70 years, who did everything a man can do and better, who did it with class, who did it quietly, who never complained, who never made her gender an excuse for why bad things had happened to her through the chaos going on in the world and also in her family and her personal life. And she is someone that will be remembered for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I'm just very sorry about her passing. It has been I think it's a very dark time for a lot of people, a lot of uncertainty. And I certainly hope that now King Charles and Queen Camilla continue their relationship with the United States and come and visit, our president, come and visit our incredible country. I understand that Queen Elizabeth also loved to go to the Kentucky Derby to visit horses. She had been to California. She'd been around the West. In my home state of Arizona, they are very proud that there is a painting hanging in a local museum that was present at her coronation. There is a great source of pride and admiration for Queen Elizabeth. And I think the entire family, aside from two people you already know.
I mean, I think the history with the US presidents is just fascinating, isn't it, Meghan? I mean, this was a woman who hosted JFK and Jackie at Buckingham Palace, and then hosted Donald Trump and Melania at Buckingham Palace. And in fact, she met every single US president aside from LBJ in terms of her time as monarch.
Yes, and there were two moments which the First Lady, Michelle Obama, broke protocol and President Trump broke protocol. Michelle Obama infamously hugged her, which is something that is obviously against royal protocol, and she handled it with a lot of grace and humor, and did the same thing with President Trump, who I believed walked in front of her when, it went against social decorum and protocol. So again, I think just a class act, and a woman who really understood the deep importance of our allyship between America and the United Kingdom. It will maintain a very, very important and significant relationship, the most important in our country. It's the first country we can rely on. For me personally, just looking back at my memories of Queen Elizabeth, the time that I've been, I think, most touched was when she had the Star Spangled Banner played in front of Buckingham Palace after 9/11, which was also, something that had been unusual and unique, and the only time it had happened, as a sign of our allyship, a sign of her, deep love for the United States of America. And I wish people who are criticizing, which again, I really want to emphasize, this is the woke academia in the country. This really isn't a great representation of average Americans and the American public, but she's a very beloved figure, and in a lot of different ways. And I really, really hope that King Charles understands that this allyship is something that is extremely important to my country and should continue on in the same kind of fashion that she held for so long.
No, such a good point. Such a good point. Absolutely. And it has been so lovely to hear, Meghan, that ordinary American folk are sharing in our grief. What's interesting, Meghan, just a final word actually, do you know what's so interesting about the American news channels? Apparently they're desperate to keep on covering this story because, of course, the ratings have doubled apparently for CNN since the Queen's death, but they just have to find a way to do it, I guess, in their woke way, which we expect, don't we? That's how the media works. But look, thank you for your column. That is the Star DailyMail.com columnist Meghan McCain. Absolutely lovely to speak to you, Meghan. And it's been such a pleasure to have your company live here at Buckingham Palace. Thank you, of course, to all of my guests and all of you at home for watching. I'd love to hear from you. Please share your memories of the Queen at GB News on Twitter. My email address is dan@gbnews.uk. And you can follow the Dan Wootton Club on Twitter. I come and join after the show, and you can find that by looking to find me on Twitter at Dan Wootton.